Timothy, or Notes of an Abject Reptile by Verlyn Klinkenborg. Timothy, or Notes of an Abject Reptile, Verlyn Klinkenborg, to Lindy. Timothy. A very intelligent and observant person has assured me that in the former part of his life, keeping but one horse, he happened also on a time to have but one solitary hen. These two incongruous animals spent much of their time together in a lonely orchard, where they saw no other creature but each other. By degrees an apparent regard began to take place between these two sequestered individuals. The fowl would approach the quadruped with notes of complacency, rubbing herself gently against his legs, while the horse would look down with satisfaction and move with the greatest caution and circumspection, lest he should trample on his diminutive companion. Thus, by mutual good offices, each seemed to console the vacant hours of the other, so that Milton, when he puts the following sentiment in the mouth of Adam, seems to be somewhat mistaken: much less bird with beast, or fish with fowl, so well converse, nor with the ox the ape. Gilbert White, The Natural History of Selborne, 1789. The way to Selborne is Dorchester, Wallingford, Pangbourne. Here leave the Reading road and go down the turnpike for Aldermaston Wharf, Aldermaston, Basingstoke, Tunworth Down, under Hackwood Park Pales, the Golden Pot Alehouse, Alton, Farringdon, Horse and Jockey, Selborne. Gilbert White to Ralph Churton, 31 August 1780. I was gone for more than a week before they found me. A rustling in the bean field, heavy steps nearby, a shout, the boy's voice, more shouts. Thomas catches me up in his hands with sickening haste. I weigh 6 pounds 13 ounces. He lifts me as though I weigh nothing at all. Ground bakes away. May wind shivers in my ears. My legs churn the sky on their own. I look down on bean tops, down on the blunt ends of sheep-bitten grasses, over one field into the next, into the hot garden beyond, past thatch and tiles, past maypole, past gilded cock on the church tower, all in my eye, all at once, so far to see. Goody Hammond and Daniel Wheeler's boy totter forward beside Thomas. Great, warm, two-legged beasts, still gaited like the rest of their kind. The boy prances backward, eyeing me closely. Bland, watery orbs, fringed with pale hair. Cavernous mouth, halloos as though I were the king's stag being drawn through the village in a deer cart. My week gone in 2 scores of their strides. Through the meadow, past the alcove and down the brick walk. Wicket gate clicks shut behind us. Thomas sets me down beside the asparagus, edge of my umbrageous forest, all feet square on the ground again, into the rubbery trunks, young asparagus thrusting out of the earth like turtles' heads, ferns just joining, and a canopy above. Print of Thomas's warm fingers on my tiled belly, smell of tar and damp mold. The voices separate and blow away. The boys' cries ring down the street with cries of other boys. A silence behind them, a hollow in the day. Earthworms breach and tunnel, tunnel and breach. Old Hercules in the great mad gestures as always, unmoving. Wooden features sadly weathered ever since I first knew them. Goody Hammond sweeps white apple blossoms from the grass plot, sings a scrap of song over and over as she works, wheezing like the blacksmith's bellows across the way. Oh, cries my very heart, doth bleed with sorrow for thy sake. Greenfinch rattles in the beds nearby, heedless of danger. Mayfly vanishes in the blur of swallow's wings over the gravel walk. Swallow bill closes, a smart snap shutting off a watch case. The fuss of humans made when they found me. Escape of the old Sussex tortoise. 8 days' pursuit, captured in Hampshire beanfield. Authentic deeds of old gardener, weeding woman, shocking boy. Thomas regarded me sternly before setting me down, cocked his hat, took breath to speak, then didn't. Watched till I was deep in the asparagus, safely out of sight. Out! Daniel Wheeler's boy shouted when they found me stumbling over his heels. Timothy got out! The boy is mistaken. There is no out. Humans believe the asparagus forest is in. Fruit wall, laurel hedge, melon ground. They prey upon the distinction, but I am always out, among the anemones, on the grass plot, in the shade of the Dutch currant trees, in the sainfoin just short of the pound field, under young beans a week away, under the rasping green rust smell of their leaves, and I was in there too, as always, in, under unhedged stars darker than moon, among chiding of field crickets, stirring of long grasses, gleaming wind, groaning of beech trees on the hanger, clap of thunder and din of hail, a honeyed smell of maples and sycamores in bloom, clouds pulling apart to show their crimson, beyond sight of humans, within my beloved shell. Great soft tottering beasts, they are out. Houses never buy when they need them. Even the humblest villagers live in ill-fitting houses. The greater the personage, the worse the fit. Crescent of pale shell at the ends of their fingers, drab rows of person-scented cloth hang about them. Dimity, corduroy, buckram, fustian, holland, shalloon, cambric, stuff, wool, false head of hair, or kerchief, or hat, contrivance of hide or wood on the feet, or none at all, crust of polished dirt, sore cracked soles, broken nails. Nothing as elegant as a horse's clean hoof, the arc of its wall, my own cruel calls. That mass of body and brain pan to heat and cool with their internal fires, no tegument, no pelt to help them. Only what they fashion for themselves, what they scout together from the world, fleece, hide, feathers, scales, and shell all denied them. Faint thin leather of their own growing, proof against nothing, uneconomic creatures. Humans of Selborne wake all winter, above ground, eating and eating, breathing and talking, huddled close to their fires, fanning the ashes, guarding the spark. Never a lasting silence for them, never more than a one-night rest. When they go down in the ground, they go down in boxes for good, and only with the help of others standing round, peering into darkness of the cold earth they fear, the neat rectangular hole. Men haul peat from the forest, laboring over ruts and horse tracks and onto the village cartway. They measure out bushels of coal, cut cordwood, stack beech billet, cleft wood, and faggots go to claw over lop and top. Smoke beats down over the village, tumbles from chimneys thick over fields, beech smoke, coal smoke, peat smoke, London smoke, a sulphurous haze from the northeast. Cold wind settles against the glass, rain under the tiles. Through the wind-torn thatch, only the oak-shingled roof of St. Mary's keeps tight above the village. Flights of snow, epidemic to freeze. Winter comes like the clamoring of the stone curlew, a noise in the air of something passing quick over their heads after it becomes dark. To humans, in and out are matters of life and death. Not to me. Warm earth waits just beneath me, the planet's vicious, scalding core. It takes a cool blood to feel that warmth here at its circumference. The human's own heat keeps him from sensing it. I drift for months, years great night, floating on the outer edge of Earth's corona, the only calendar in my blood. How it drugs me. When autumn pinches, I dig. November darkens, fasting long since begun. Day after day, steady, steady, stroke on one side, stroke on the other, slow as the hour hand, and just as relentless, swimming in place, burrowing my body's length and depth. Ease in, out, adjust the fit. Another day or two, no rush, no rush. Ease in again, a last fitting, air hole open. Stow legs, retreat under roof of self, under vault of ribs and spine. Loose earth covers my back, laurel leaves, walnut leaves, chalk soil, Dorton mold. I wait, then cease to wait. Earth rolls repeatedly through day and night, layer of rime. The frost binds in snow, that friendly meteor, kindly mantle of infant vegetation, insulating all of us who cling to the soil, who have not got too upright, too far from the native horizontal. Earth beneath me throbs with warmth. Cold black sky presses down. Current of memory tugs at me, a long, long descent into perfect absence. I remember only where I'm going. Meanwhile, the village stirs. Boys slide on ice, girls trap hands, straddle bob. Orion trips downward over the brew house, over the hangar. Barnyard turnip piles freeze hard as stone. Men shovel the track to Newton, hollow lanes. Deep as a cottage, narrow as a walk, filled with snow. Pack houses go belly deep in open country. Rugged Siberian weather. Laplandian scene. The village cut off for weeks, hidden in the folds of England. Poultry confounded. Bantams fly over their house. 41 sheep buried in snow, redbreasts, wrens, and beggars in barns and cowhouses. Worries about prices of mutton, hay, barley seed. Halls freeze on hedges. Pheasant stands on dung pile. Hares cross the garden snowpack and crop the pinks. Gardeners take aim from the windows. Mr. Gilbert White watches through the parlor window. Tries to remember just where he saw me digging last fall. All his garden buried in drifts. Returns to his letter. Stitch in his side from writing to niece Molly in London, asking her to send breakfast green tea and best tea. Great beast of a town, cold as Petersburg, Londoners on the frozen Thames, snow like basalt, carriages quiet on the cobbles for once, cushioned by snow, sounds of a deserted city, many weeks until mackerels are cried in the streets, until green geese move along them in droves, driven by a boy just their speed. Mr. Gilbert White writes, Mad dog from Newton Great Farm bites dogs in Selborne Street. Farmer Berryman's cow, he reports, got into the barn's floor the night, and gorged herself so as at a heap of thrashed wheat, that she died what they call sprung, being blown up to a vast size. 17 residents of Newton Farm and a horse have gone in a cart to be dipped in the sea. Miss John White knits beside Mr. Gilbert White. One row for her old life, one for the new. Parlor cat turns electric in dry nights of frost. Parlor fire rages. Close stools freeze beneath beds. Horses breathe their stable fog. Lambs drop from the womb to freeze to the ground. Venus shadows. Walls steam with water. Thatch reeks in the sun. Fields pour torrents into the lanes that worm their way around Selborne. Waking dreams of the human winter. My blood creeps along a dark, endless track. On quiet feet, circles round and round as though it had lost its way, but always finding its way again. No counting the circuits it makes under the compass rose of my carapace. One day corpuscles prick as they pass, agitation in the capillaries, new trails through the underwood of flesh. Fresh tide washes over the rocks, rushing mill stream spills through the heart. I rouse before I know I'm rousing, hatched from the great egg of earth, spring wrecked on the surface, my living to make, pipped again. I blink and blink. Look into my crater, the nest that bears me over and over and over and over. Surprised to come up always just where I went down, to be the only hatchling. Surprised to find myself in the parish of Selborne, county of Southampton, garden of Mr. Gilbert White. I remember Ringmer, Miss Rebecca Snook, a post-chaise, a servant's basket, a ship, the empty city of my origins far away, warm sea, salt sea spreading at its feet. Cyprus in the distance, Nike and Hermes and mosaics underfoot, as weathered as old Hercules, but far more ancient, a country swollen with emptiness and heat. I once had other expectations. I heave up the mold, unbury myself. In this place I am considered a sign of spring, like a bubbling of breeches on the hanker, or the return of the first birds of passage. But I am a sign of spring, the way flooding in Gracious Street is a sign of a high water. Over the goose hatch, the thing itself, the season advances directly through me. Year after year, Mr. Gilbert White notes the occasion. He has been up for months, stands over me while rising still blinds me, before hunger returns, long winter lingering in mouth and bowel. Mr. Gilbert White records the date, the weather, the conjunction at my arrival of a bat, a red start, a daffodil, a troop of shell snails. Timothy the tortoise begins to stir, he writes. He heaves up the mold that lies over his back. Timothy the tortoise heaves up the sod under which he is buried. Timothy the tortoise heaves up the earth. Timothy the tortoise roused himself from his winter slumbers and came forth. No other news in Selborne? No mad dog abiding? No cow springing on the barn floor? What makes my rising monumentous to anyone but me? I have seen these humans in their disarray, far more common than any finery. Hair wrung into knots, stockings fallen, skirts clotted with mud and manure, eyes, noses red from fist rubbings, coarsening wind. Eruptions on rough hands from hop picking, itching tumors from harvest bugs, jaws tied up with toothache, the headache, faces choked with drink, sweat, sleep, stupidity, confusions of the rut, such a bulk of being to regulate. Disorder stalks them day and night, they stalk it back, but I consider that I have no hair, no fur, no raiment to disarrange, no silver-trimmed livery hat to hang on a peg, like Thomas, no grizzle wig to keep free of lice, no hogged breeches or cambric shirt bosom to be worked by Miss Royal, no shoes to keep soiled and blackened, no buckles to polish or undergarments to fetter the nose. My shell never slips askew, pupil never dims, beak never dulls, leather never pales. Dew glistens on my legs and head my undertile. Yes, the mold sometimes clings to my back as I rise in April. Yes, I carry the dishabille of earth for a time. Mr. Gilbert White writes to nephew Samuel Barker, when a man first rouses himself from a deep sleep, he does not look very wise, but nothing can be more squalid and stupid than our friend when he first comes crawling out of his hibernacula. Who watches the curate wake? How wise does he look at bedbreak, who judges him so dispassionately? Late on summer nights he comes into the garden, to see if the bat still flies, to observe by candlelight what moths and earwigs do in the dark. He appears without false hair, Candle held to one side, pale natural skull like half-moon under his stubble. He clasps together the waist of a coat thrown over his open shirt, hiding the animal within. Bare calves beneath, spindles of flesh. He does not look very wise, tossing stones into the hedge to make the sedge-bird sing its nice song. Mr. Gilbert White quotes the poet's lines at my advent every spring. Timotheus, he calls me then, Timotheus, he says, has raised up his head, as awaked from the dead, and amazed he stares around. Amazed, yes, I do stare around. Awaked from nearer the dead than Mr. Gilbert White imagines. Light pours in, soft mist. Walnut tree as bare as it was when I began digging. Sky is rude, wind still chafes, and for several nights I return to my winter's nest. But earthworms already writhe in endless venery. Heat of the loam comes on apace, a growing weather. Everything connected to earth by root or foot feels it coming, has felt it coming for many weeks. Beeches break bud, apricot blossoms, dog's tooths, violets blow. I am late for the first flush of the season, honeybee warming itself on a clod. Mr. Gilbert White tuning his strong beer, new green in the wheat, but spring folds open as I awake. Returned from my slow submersion, winter has fled northward on icy legs, carrying off the dead. Sweet, reviving breeze calls all the living away from grief. Soft red evenings, day after day, crimson sun pulsing at the far end of the hangar. A swarming heat in the air, good for the husbandman. Warmth runs far ahead from the light, exhausting all of creation, pitiless ambition of the expanding season. Gander leads the sow by the ear away from the sitting goose. Birdsong before first light until well into the night. Voice of the cuckoo in the hangar. Nightingale in the outlet, wryneck in the orchard, missel thrush, master of the coppice. Shifshaft fetches an echo at every note, ring-dove coos, toying on the wing, snipe pipes and hums overhead until dark. Alice Beecher and Mr. Gilbert White stand beside the wicket gate. She is a tortoise taller than he is. He gives a paper of Savoy seed and 3 eggs from Gunnery, the bantam hen who broods in the nest over the saddle cupboard. Alice puts them in her apron. She hears an April grasshopper in the bushes, an impossibility, small, brittle fizzing. Mr. Gilbert White tells her it is really a tiny bird, a grasshopper lark. She asks why she has never seen one. They are such shy, skulking varlets, such hedge creepers, says Mr. Gilbert White, that there is no knowing where to have them. Alice laughs out loud, claps heavy red hands over her face. She is trying to be polite, but this is as funny as saying that a cow is really a horse or a woman is a man. She thanks Mr. Gilbert White for the seed and eggs, walks through Ewell Gate into the hop gardens and fume of spring, where unhatched grasshoppers whisper aloud in April just as they've always done, where fire drakes cross the skies when shooting stars fall. A world of country people beyond Mr. Gilbert White's garden, deep in superstition and knowledge, the two almost inseparable, set upon their ways as he is set upon his. Men pull their hops around the village, beyond the garden back, down the hollow behind Gracious Street. Women bind hop vines with rushes and crocus leaves. Rows of poles sough in the wind. Oats and barley vegetate. Hopes of the season rise. Wheat thrives again after its winter burn, and sheep are turned into it to eat it down and give it stronger roots. Women will be turned into it later, to weed. Humans come and go in the garden from first light to last, pruning, grubbing, burning, sowing, trenching, thinning, planting out, repairing the thatched earth house, harrowing out the couch grass, raising the melon house, covered with best writing paper, Edmonds and Harper in the poultry, thick oliphant cut, taking up tulips as they fade, setting out annuals, a generosity to the plantings here, asparagus forest, onions, radishes, young celery, endive to be tied up in early September, parsnips, boracle, garden beans, white cucumbers under hand glasses, prickly seeded spinach, artichokes, cauliflowers in rich ground, vigorous rank growth of potatoes, autumn lettuces, Cossin Dutch, to winter under straw, carrots and cabbages laid out by hundreds in long promenades, as if from my parade ground, cabbage shade most welcome in the heat of noon. Goody Hammond sets down her basket, sinks to her haunches wheezing. Christ, my very heart, May comes to this garden, and so does she, and all summer through. In August she gleans in the wheat stubbles, stooped over the corn, honest, ignorant, staunch as stone, weeds with a short stick, heel of her hand, trowel with long fingers. Digs and digs, never lays herself down, never covers herself over with mold, never hides from the season. Browned and chapped and leathered, hair like straw under an ancient livery hat, her relief is to be on hands and knees again. Shadows thicken under shrubs, under hazels and walnut, thunderhead of oak leaves out on the great mead. Grass rushes upward. I sink in an inedible green sea, shun the heat, withdraw breath of personal cornice, conceal myself under an awning of dead grass, a garden mat. My antic blood, wicket gate stands ajar. Was it an escape? I was 81 years old at the time. Age and torpidity are against me, so human thinks, who grow torpid in age? A better question, how do I escape from that nimble-tongued, fleet-footed race? It helps if they leave the wicket gate open. The true secret, walk through the holes in their attention. Easier at my speed than at any faster rate. At evening, larkers stalk the wheat fields, nets spread. Bits of mirror flash behind them. Larks fly into the glittering, and the nets. Larkers cage them. Off they go to wealthy tables, waiting mouths, in Tunbridge and bridal stone. So it is with humans. Quickness draws their eye, entangles their attention. What they notice they call reality, but reality is a fence with many holes, a net with many tears. I walk through them slowly. My slowness is deceptively fast. The humans talk to me, talk and talk. They say what they think I'll understand, hail me from a distance as though I were an unexcitable dog. Child in ill health, fellow rake, sagest of counselors, ask my thoughts about the barley, the wheat, the hops, about the weather down here, forget themselves and keep talking, remember themselves, pretend not to be talking. I keep my words hidden in the prow of my skull. Miss John White crops vegetables for the kitchen, cuts flowers for the table, apologizes if she comes upon me meditating in the foliage, stoops beside me, lays a warm hand on my shell, admires my mosaic visage, my obsidian eye, a gentle touch. If I look up at her and say, "Now, then, what comes next?" Mr. Ralph Churton visits the house at Christmas. Rector of Middleton Cheney. Here the summer of my second escape. They captured me that time near the Upper Malt House. Mr. Ralph Churton writes a letter about it to his host, Mr. Gilbert White, who is visiting his brethren near London. Timothy looks very well, Mr. Ralph Churton assures him, and says not a syllable of a late elopement. He thinks he is being ironic. Mr. Ralph Churton walks through the garden, book in hand. Swallows hawk the hedges behind him. Rustle of a summer wind across the bright sky, sheep bells, a calf's bawling caught in the breeze, rill of birdsong. Mr. Ralph Churton glances down at me. "Behold the philosophic Timothy," he says in passing, raising an arm in salutation. Irony, again. I am some thoughtful centurion, some scribbling consul. Behold the philosophic Churton, I may say in return, but he isn't philosophic enough. My voice would shatter his human solitude. The happiness of his breed depends on it. The world is theirs to arrange, so they tell themselves, a word or two for me, now then, and they have all that arranging to do over again. Can I trust Mr. Gilbert White with a syllable or two? He keeps his countenance turned toward the wild, knows the elocution of every season, every hour, tunes his ear to nature's sound. On foot or horseback, every day over the parish, hears the inward melody of a black cap, titlark as it feeds in nearby pasture, stops stock still in a meadow, leaning upon his stick, notes the songs down, chamois linings to his breeches pockets, 7 pockets to his jacket, papers in each of them, sermons, carefully docketed receipts, most recent letter from Barrington or Molly White, scraps with dates and birdsongs. Good woman crosses a pasture field, daughter by one hand, brindle cow by the other. They see Mr. Gilbert White on a stout Galloway mare. He rises from the saddle, stands on his stirrups above the rubbed pigskin seat, peers at the nest in an oak bough. Haymakers watch him dismount the short grass behind him. He kneels stiffly in black leather breeches, worn almost through. They rub against the stirrup leathers, examines a barrel, probes it with his riding crop. Good woman, haymaker's daughter, think nothing of it. Brindle cow finds it curious. Mr. Gilbert White hands the reins to Thomas in a deluge, steps across the stable yard, dirty boots, dripping bobwig, silk oilskin hood, carries a fistful of daffy-down dilly root for ague, arum dracunculus from the vicarage garden, a cutting from a plant nearly as old as I am, halves of a broken plover egg in pocket, alderum in coin, book of common prayer, teasing a conjecture in his mind all afternoon, never noticing the downpour, a way to naturalize canary birds. History of noxious insects, monographies on earthworms or grasses, life and conversation of the swift, perhaps just mulling a passage from Linnaeus or Luke, or the dog that stands on its hind legs to eat from his apricot tree. Mr. Gilbert White rears a cucumber, coddles the melon, improves the polyanth and hyacinth, wages endless war to keep peaches and nectarines and apricots whole and unblemished, mellow wall fruit, catches hornets with half glasses on his own strong beer, bird lime on the end of a hazel twig, treacle in a bottle, a bounty for wasps' nests, and the capture of queens. 50,000 wasps destroyed in a single summer, plundering invaders, felon race he calls them. Worthless souls, a harsh judgment even from one who loves apricots, feeds the nests to the bantam fowl. Nothing to be done about the humans who steal his wall fruit in the night, who break hand glasses and overset his mounting block once every dozen years. 6 pence he offers for stories of the bird many names, goatsucker, churn owl, fern owl, evejar, puckeridge, caprimulgus. The Selburne boys deliver what they saw, where and when. Old woman living under the hanger brings him fern owl eggs. Neighbors, strangers carry curiosities to him, young snipe, 3 snipes' eggs. Common seagulls still alive, barnacle goose shot in a bram-shot pond, butterflies, landrail, half-fledged fern owls, 3-pound trout, fine pike, hairball from the stomach of a fat ox, male otter, 21 pounds, taken in the rivulet below Priory Longbed, last of its kind ever found in the parish, pleased to receive it. Mr. Gilbert White visits the farmers to see what carcasses they nail to the ends of their barns. The countryman's museum, 2 albino rooks, a peregrine falcon, takes up the corpses in his Norway doe gloves, runs his fingers against the grain of the feathers, death-clasped feet, sunken eye, flightless wings. Sunday comes, and he stands before the village in the stone shade of St. Mary's, the Reverend Gilbert White of Selburne in the county of Southampton, clerk, fellow of Oriel College, Oxford, annual stipend, curate for an absentee vicar, clean white surplice, plain unaffected voice, learned accent, a gentle tone for climatic words. Easter. Let us therefore rejoice, Mr. Gilbert White says, reading from his own handwriting, and be glad on this day of Christian triumph, for our last and most formidable enemy is now destroyed. All his attempts upon the captain of our salvation were weak and vain, and all the power of hell cannot now prevail against them that fight under his standard. He believes in a captain of salvation and the power of hell. Death, the most formidable enemy, he says, is now destroyed. The Lamb who was slain now liveth again, he believes, and so he says aloud to his parishioners, though on this earth the Lamb who is slain is supper. It falls to the knife in the butcher's shambles, a sudden start of blood, behind lime trees and lilacs, purple and white, screen of hollyhocks planted by Mr. Gilbert White, to hide the sight of our most formidable enemy from his street-facing windows. Wasps and blue timice lay in wait. So does Sarah Dewey. She has been promised a quarter for Mr. Gilbert White's larder. The flesh hangs in a meat safe of deal and fine fly wire, dangles from a walnut tree in his garden, endless buzzing overhead and sultry weather when joints spoil. The language of birds is very ancient, Mr. Gilbert White also believes, although he does not say so to his parish, and like other ancient modes of speech, very elliptical. Little is said, but much is meant and understood. He translates bird songs, finds just the analogy, Selburne alts hoot and vox humana, pitches of F sharp, B flat, A flat. Goose prefers the trumpet. Marsh titmouse sets up the wedding of a saw. Male fern owl serenades its mate with the clattering of castanets, beginning just as the Portsmouth evening gun sounds away to the briny south. Coincidences mean much to him. Bees swarm as sheep are sheared, beetles buzz as partridges call, swifts seize their midsummer flight just as the fern owl begins to chatter. Can I trust Mr. Gilbert White with a syllable? Would something shudder within him? Now, then, I might say as he stoops to admire a hyacinth of his own breeding, a knot of worsted tied to the stick that stands before it. Now, then, before he shoots the green flinches, tearing the blossoms. Now, then, and what comes next? He is happier translating a language he doesn't know, happier believing despite himself that the language of the brute creation is no language at all, that true speech is human and the rest inarticulate metaphor, yelling of cats, braying of donkeys, grunting and whistling of bucks in autumn, shrieking of swifts on the wing, the sound, he says, of the juncture when the busyness of generation is carrying on. A language that humans speak to beneath the hatch, cat-like, donkey-like, buck-like, swift-like. To make his metaphors true would beggar him. His tortoise speaks to him verily in an ancient elliptical tongue. Now then, his captain in rude health one fine Easter morning, walking among the graves outside St. Mary's. Now then, all the world to be arranged. Humans crowd around the village square, the plaster at evening, sycamore blooms, boys play at tom and peg top, girls at the work of mothering. The courting gather, overwatched by St. Mary's and her owls and dolls and swifts, decayed labours bask in the presence of so much youth, where the great ash recently stood, huge stubborn mass turned by art into bushels, half bushels, pecks, gallons, and seed laps. During the day villagers plagued Mr. Jack Burby in his shop, buying round frocks and stamp paper, buttons and mohair and silk, paying taxes at his counter, land, window, house, and servant, committing themselves for eventual burial. They walk the single straggling street that rises and bends from one end of Selborne to the other, pause at Mr. John Carpenter's new bow window. Meagre stock of bentware goods, copperage, nails, and locks, gossip within the murk of blood, the echoing cries of the shambles over the way, consult with John Hale for butcher's meat, malt, straw, and oats. Blacksmith grinds a hoe, points a prong, small comings and goings of the village. 313 humans live along the street, damp clutch of mammals, writhings of warm flesh and kinship interwoven in need, scarcely one without another, solitude to see, solitaries nearly crazy. Villagers keep pigs and chickens and cats and dogs and swarms of children, no one so poor as lack a beast or a child. 3 men keep caged bullfinches, 1 a tame bat, another a buzzard that eats winged ants, tame snake, tame raven, pugnacious young cuckoo found at a hedge sparrow's nest, redbreast that sings only in candlelit rooms. Mr. Jack Burby kept a brown owl that loved to wash itself until it washed too deep and drowned. Farmers, Berryman and Turner, raise prize cattle. Dorsetshire ewes that lamb before the year is fairly begun. They treat their kind like daughters newly betrothed to rich young men. Lord Stawell's hunters exercise in a nearby meadow on sands around Woolmer Pond. Grooms handle them punctiliously. The grace of courtiers. Farmer Hale trains a chestnut and a bay in the church clothes. Wears a blue smock frock and knee-high boots, carries a limber stock whip, stops from time to time to rest himself. The horses nibble one another's necks, as if turned out into the aftergrass in the shadow of the hangar. Forsaken martin nests along the street, foul and full of vermin. Mr. Gilbert White knocks them down with a stout stick. It pleases him to watch the birds rebuild. Village cats watch too. They take swift stooping under the eaves, young bats emerging from the chimney-neat lades. The 2 great motives of love and hunger yawl back and forth through Selborne, driving human and beast alike. To Farmer Parsons and Daniel Lowe, the miller, to Miss Royal and Martha Knight, nature is worn and familiar, like the needle-hardened fingers of a poor girl a Phoebe Cobb takes as her dowry, but nature is also a theatre of the passions. Fox runs up the midday street, wrens whistle at it, humans and dogs rush after in a pack, yowling in equal measure, no telling them apart until the very end. One of the men lifts the creature up by the nape, blood already drying in the fur on the muzzle. Boy's slip leads in the dogs. Is nature the beast, or the chase, or the drying blood? Old hunting mare clatters down from the common and into the village street, kicking in pain at her underside, implores the help of humans who have none to give her. After a life among them, she dies among them in the night, her one last question unanswered. Humans in the parish have little enough to command over their own lives, little enough self-purpose for all their pother. No one notices the self-command of parish animals except Mr. Gilbert White. He glimpses an inner coherence, a sufficiency, but then he believes in his own coherence too. He defers to the evidence of early risers, country people abroad well before light. They know where the frost settles. He examines their testimony carefully, defers to the clemency of his captain, whose testimony he takes on faith, the wisdom of his God manifested in the works of the creation, as if the works and the creation were somehow separate. Man of custom and faith, grandfather's village, grandfather's church, grandfather's captain, Bible once belonging to his mother, bound in the skin of her favorite dog. Every few years he walks the parish bounds as he has always done. A few select villagers, vicar or curate. 3 days of tracing the old landmarks, psalms, cake, cheese and beer, 30 miles preambulating the auspices, the limits of parish responsibility. Inside the line is Selborne. Everywhere else outside that line is elsewhere, along the little piked close, down the greenway, near the stile of the footpath that goes to Nor Hill, past Priory Ditch, Rushy Lease, the Weavers Down, Deadman's Thorn and Missingham's Maid. Make a shout and an X, read a gospel, time out of mind. Farmer Spencer, finishes his wheat harvest. Birds gather over the village like thoughts of fall, taking alarm, swarming above St. Mary's, settling and preening for the long flight to come, raising wings to take in the sun, a crackle of voices. They excite Mr. Gilbert White's most extravagant emotion. Such sights as these fill me with enthusiasm, he says. Is it departure that moves him? Gathering purpose among the birds, visible unison as the flock forms, consulting, as he says, when and where they are to go. Is it the swallow's innate sense of the wintering ground? Or does the curate imagine the flying, taking wing over the parish, striking out under the clouds, house and gardens from a higher vantage than the tower of St. Mary's or the Hanger, and then the downs, sea beyond, sunlight scattering on the waves below? Or is it the change that comes over Selborne when the martins vanish, a sense of being left behind? Only the fern owl, the redwing, the rain measurer to divert him, the thought of another winter just ahead. He weighs the improbability of such a flight against the temptation of those warmer climes. Mr. Gilbert White and his party ride out on Michaelmas Day. Thin bare trail across the open heath. Crowds of swallows roosting on shrubs and bushes, waiting for fog to clear into a delicate day, warm and bright. They flush with the passage of the horses, who start nervously at the uprising. Sudden applause of so many wings, not a summer flush, skimming after insects, all on the wing at once, direct southward toward the sea, no more to be seen. Mr. Gilbert White suspects that some of the summer birds winter as I do. Hole in the ground, cavity in a river bank, hiding as he calls it. Cannot persuade himself of the great flights into Africa. Wheat eaters, resting on ships rigging far out at sea, flocks in the shrouds. He cannot credit the thought of Selborne's hirundines, chattering out of English earshot, no longer swallow, swift, or martin, but that his own migrations have been few, to the ferns of the Isle of Ely when young, to his college at Oxford and back once or twice a year, to Mr. John Mulso at Meonstoke, to Miss Rebecca Snook at Ringmer, to his brothers in London and South Lambeth and Fifield. Miss John White has been farther abroad, with the Gibraltar garrison, latitude 36, chaplain's wife, capable of hands, complexion hardened by the Spanish sun, organizing mind, most unmilitary husband, too melancholy almost for a cleric, collector of natural fact and incident, cadets by ship. 37 days back to England, well before the siege commences, friends and fellow Englishmen catacombed in that rock for months on end, Spanish cannonades after dark, visible in their faces for years and years after, badly unstrung by it all. Miss John White hears the birds passing overhead, scouting and hurrying low over the water, seeking the narrowest passage southwest over the bay to Tangier. Voices of home, as English as the prose of her husband's burial service. With whom do live the spirits of them, swallows carrying Hampshire into Spanish skies, feathers bleached by summer, pea burnt, the country people say, color of an old weather-beaten brown wig. Has been dead these dozen years now, manuscript set aside, natural history of Gibraltar abandoned, not yet published as his brother kindly puts it. Mr. John White's legacy? Plaque in a church in Blackburn, Lancashire. Some cargoes of preserved corpses from Andalusia. A few piles of paper. Reputation as a nice observer, a very exact observer, a most accurate observer of nature, and so a son, Gibraltar Jack, and a widow, long esteemed by Mr. Gilbert White. Active disposition, Miss John White, ready to put a helping hand to any household task, knows the role of the parish wife, one of the parish widows now. Arrives my first winter here, ensconced by spring, keys in pocket, basket in hand, seeing to provisions, assisted in the family by Sarah Dewey. Prepares raspberry and strawberry jam, red currant jelly, preserves cherries and pears and apples, wields with the cook all those cabbages and cucumbers, 191 cut on the 23rd day of August in the human year 1787, wealth of the garden, curse of the garden. Miss John White wars with the insects in Mr. Gilbert White's wifeless abode. Battle of the Blatte and the house crickets. She frees the curate for study, field, and church, for parishioners and the creatures of the parish, vanishes into the intimacy of his esteem. The house unites them, the kin, the naturalist's concerns. Do the hirundines hide or migrate when winter comes? An urgency to the question that Mr. Gilbert White cannot explain even to himself. Second brood of martins just on the wing, mid-October, clinging to the street walls near the nests. Stable and brew house, top of the maypole, and those young no idea what to do next. Though the thought is forming, Mr. Gilbert White asks, will these house martins, some of which are nestlings 12 days ago, shift their quarters at this late season of the year to the other side of the northern tropic? He thinks it improbable. Why go a freakish voyage when a nearby ruin or a sandbank beckons? They must lie in secret dormitories in the winter through, beneath the underwood reach at the end of the hangar. It would appear, he writes to persuade himself, that they never depart 300 yards from the village. Evidence is lacking. Probability explains nothing. He has yet to find the winter retreat of the Selborne flocks, yet to find a torpid martin hidden in a stream bank. Wild fowls in the forest migrate. Field fares vanish at summer's end. Ants migrate from their ant hills to the great emolument of the hirundines. But whether the hirundines themselves depart in what regions, this he ponders ceaselessly. To examine the matter of hibernation, I am all the bird he has. Slow-domed one at his feet, tortoise a passage, from the head of the garden to its foot I go, and back, from the fruit wall to the walnut tree, sometimes all the way to the wicket gate and beyond. None of the contagious flurry of swallows and martins, none of the preening and clatter. Nothing to prepare but my nest, no one to convene but myself. Timothy the tortoise, Mr. Gilbert White notes, feeling the approach of cold weather, resorts to the spot where he usually hides, and sleeps in the sun under the warm hedge, tilting his shell on the edge that it may take in every ray. He watches me for clues, as intently as if I were a cucumber swelling in its frame, has no idea what skies the summer birds traipse when they leave Selborne. Goree, Senegal, Sicilian coast? No idea how far and deep I really go where I lie cached in the dead months. No idea where I come from, no notion how dislodged I am. Martins at play over the fields, ebullient on the wing, thronging. Swallows clustering on the chimneys and cottage thatch, awaiting their departure. Then one morning gone, villages nearly silent, rooftops unpeopled, empty, the regions of air above Selborne and the Tower of St. Mary's. But when I rise, birdsong rings in the bow of Selborne, resounding from hangar to Lythe and back again. Summer birds already in place, all but the swift, the fern owl, and the cherry sucker, building against the brew house, high up among the shingles of the church, gathering moss and thatch from the roofs of the houses, mud from the streets, reclaiming the nests of the previous year, new lining them with willow cotton, extravagant in song. This place, Mr. Gilbert White writes, is another Anathoth, a place of responses and echoes. Answer her, O Anathoth, is the verse that occurs to him whenever the echo stirs. Timotheus and Anathoth, the one silent creature. I met Gilbert White when he was 20 years old, the human year 1740, and I just come to England. Stolen from the ruins I was basking on, jut of wall that had stood forever in sight of the Mediterranean Sea, in earshot of its mild tides, thrust into a heavy bag by hand unseen, laid in the bottom of a cake, I suppose from the wet that began to pool around me to sap the cloth, sounds indistinguishable, human muttering, sharply silenced with a rasping bark, slap of waves against wood, creak of pitch seam and oarlock, audible bulk of a much larger vessel suddenly looming nearby. Heaved, swung upward and dropped, shot out of the bag among naked human feet and into a tangle of netting, stowed in darkness, forgotten cavern of tired labyrinthine odors, each unclean in its own way, confused stench as if the ship had been poulticed with dead fish, tar and salt, and the reek of humans. We lay by for how long? Then the wind set up a groaning in the ship's bow where I lay, keel rising and falling, swooping catenary plunge, months perhaps, many days and weeks certainly, falling and falling, tumbling away from my terracotta city, its crumbling overgrown walls, mosaic floors, plummeting toward somewhere unsurmisable, toward England as it happened. To what purpose I still cannot guess. Iota and some larger commerce, I withdrew into my shell at the first rough touch of land. Then farther into myself after a time, embarked impromptu into dormancy. Out of season, out of place, out of country, stowed away inside myself. Heir to solitude, like all my kind, never thought it solitude till I saw the great herds of English gathered thick as gnats about Chichester dock, rigging against the sky, quantities of sheep on the wet hills. Mr. Henry Snook was the vicar of Ringmer, a churchman like his nephew Mr. Gilbert White, but a vicar of the orotund sort, business in the diocese of Chichester. A valet took Mr. Henry Snook down to that sea town one day, chance encounter with a drunken sailor, disconsolate tortoise wrapped in a scrap of soiled huckaback, half a crown swapped hands, one pair rope chafed, salt bitten, the other as smooth and white as Mr. Gilbert White's writing paper. I was laid on a covered basket and slung at servant's side, free at last from keel heaving, I think, only to suffer a swift brutal trot, jouncing against the servant's hip for 40 miles, arrived at a clot of houses on the shoulder of the downs, almost within scent of the sea, humans all about, a fearsome many, dark wet pillars of cloth, nodding as we passed, wet eye, pale hand, bared head, quizzical bows, unintelligible sounds flung from their mouths, more humans in one glance than I had seen in a lifetime. Wet, foreign, light of a cold, manicured country, every direction showed the human in the landscape. Fields stitched together by hedges, lanes overlooked by rows of yew and elm and lime, district of gates and stiles and paths, country tended as closely as its sheep, fat as its flocks, rooks in the oaks overhead, tree-tops tangling, lofty elms, crossbills in the Scotch pine boughs. I was set down between high brick walls in a damp court before the house, exuding its own fogs, stationary ships hold under a column of sky, there to spend 40 years, as Timothy, as Tortoise, name bestowed by Mr. Henry Snook, exclamation by Miss Rebecca Snook, his wife. I had time to discover just who and what she meant. 40 years, lifetime of a human born and bred in Selborne, if given equal chance, substantial swath of time even to me. Rains failed that first year. Mists on the ponds where neighbors came for water, brick loam in the courtyard and clay beneath, like living in a china basin, vast chops and cracks in the soil, and wet years, mud, blind house windows staring down, sometimes catching a flight of sea-driven clouds or a lone gull in mackerel sky, tiny miserable kingdom of one. I lived under a tuft of hepaticas. To hibernate was merely to daub myself in mire, whole winters bare-backed, no soil stiff enough to cover me, wrenched out of the proper seasons, preposterous rain, murderous frosts, weather gone utterly awry, blood with it, when to dig and when to rise, when to forget. Great events of those years? Drought that undermined buildings and walls, black spring of barren cows, whole dairies out of calf, death by lightning of a coach horse at grass, dog plague that killed the moping Dick Cannon of the King's Review at Portsmouth, firings at Spithead, thundering about the house, shaking the very earth, and the demise of Mr. Henry Snook. 23 years of ignoring me after a chance purchase, a few obvious witticisms among friends. I was perhaps not discursive enough for his tastes, nor was he likely to talk unbidden to a reptile unless a company had gathered about him. Round and round that courtyard I went, round and round under my shoot of sky, beginning to believe in such things as out. 40 years. I was intrepid at birth, hatched in the Chilean brush, above the warm salt sea, possessed of the memories I know to be ancient instinct. Broken shells in a common nest, the only sign of kin, mother ascent in the gravel, father ascent on mother, pinnacles of rubble rising out of the slope below me. Human ruins, a devastated city, dwellings unroofed, tombs fractured, cisterns empty, profound shade under the stone arches still intact. I came and went and came again, to hear the sea wind trapped by the walls, to sun myself on so much blank stone, raucous drift of gulls overhead. A few furtive goat herds, burdened donkey, fishermen come ashore to mend his nets, wait out the African wind, or fill his goatskin at the well below the ruins, wary of the ones who built those walls buried upslope, barely willing to set stone upon stone or settle for more than a single night, a single fire. Who would build such a city only to abandon it? Rubble masons gone, kilns cold, coin makers forgotten, lineage broken, inhabitants vanished, florid bathers stepping like naked graces from the bath, water slipping follicle by follicle down the skin, all now desiccated, baths, aqueducts dry, every tale, every memory belonging to that race now lapsed. Some of what they forgot I remember. Loggerheads on the sands, moons on their backs, dragging a great bulk forward, sorrow in every landward step, digging as though distrusting the instinct, turning to lay as though regretting the ancestry that brings them ashore. One dam makes for water, eye as great as a new midwinter moon, sweep of forelegs curved like the blade of a haymaker's scythe, a glimpse of her hovering in the shallows at dawn, yolk in the sea's white, relieved of her burden, freed from the landside tyranny of right side up, counterpoise of the deep, sliding mid-column through the pressure of water, to rest on the drift, to slumber so lightly moored to the bottom, to remember to breathe now and then, to forget the step of life on that land. That stoic progress, all but once or twice a year. Were the humans who lived in that place stolen by pirates, herded off by captors, borne away by one plague or another, snatched from their sleep unknowing as I was? Or was this grandeur not grand enough? Mr. Gilbert White's question all over again, hiding or migration. Probability explains nothing. Longevity itself is not long enough to know. Every day Miss Rebecca Snook appears. First Englishwoman, first human of my close acquaintance. Curious in tortoises. Just past the middle of her long years, towering overhead, colossal solitary bloom of cloth, astonishing headgear, especially on sunny days, fully rigged with feminine sail overall, though seeming to lack ballast, rustling and roaring as she walks, impossible at first to tell just how she is propelled, launched each morning with the maid's assistance after a night in dry dock. Pale, protected flesh of hands, childless woman, imperious at feeling. Still so some 40 years later, gouty, dropsical in the leg, palsied for a time, one side shuddered, drooping speech, but a swift recovery. Out almost daily in a carriage until the last, whirl away in the horse's dust, scattering good deeds, improving pamphlets, mushroom sauce of her own making, advice and admonishment, strong words of approval and disapproval, kindly meant, kindly taken. Good morning, Timothy, for 40 years. Good evening, Timothy. Good evening, Miss Snook. Dew-damp hem of her garden dress, patterned feet until her legs grew too swollen, her particular person musk, an aroma most days, as though she had been hiding herself in the cutting garden, taint of cook's citrus oil on the fingers she extends to me, trials in early days over my palate, seed cake, cat's meat, chicken liver, raw egg, calf's foot jelly, unspeakable delicacies carried from her plate to the border where I lie. Timothy, she cries, try some. At last the delicacies ended, or I would have wasted away to a cavity. Lettuce, kidney beans, a wafer of cucumber, dandelion or sow whistle when in season, good ringmer, apples, pears, and grapes, those sufficed, even delectable in dry autumns. Not a poppy leaf to be had for 40 years, grateful for an arbitrary stomach, able to fast almost at will. 40 years Miss Rebecca Snook teeters around her courtyard, increasingly vertiginous, cup and saucer in one hand on fair days, work basket sometimes dangling from an elbow, volume of religious poems in her fingers, feet peeping out from under her skirts like goslings under a spring goose, thinks nothing of walking and talking at the same time. Walking and talking while thinking of something else entirely. Took up the stick for a while, but that was just another limb in the way. Mr. Gilbert White appears once or twice in autumn and spring, slender, knobby compared to the plush vicar of Ringmer, dry, deliberate manner in the pulpit, learned decorum in his correspondence with men of science, but a warmth, a somehow precise playfulness in the family, hive of questions always buzzing, monster of interrogation, always felt his eye fixed upon me, curiosity amuck. Still a young man at first, frugality not quite confirmed in his character, yet already a careful keeper of accounts. A settled habit, receipts docketed, balance carried forward, able to stretch 20 pounds as far as Mr. John Mulso's 40 pounds, shilling lost at cards in the common room, 6 pence read the 3rd and 4th volumes of Amelia, considerably more for a party at the Three Goats, to purchase Fairy Queen, a leather-colored spaniel dog of the Blenheim breed, a man of sport, yet also 200 broccoli prance, 300 Savoys, 2 silver and 1 Scotch burr, 15 loads of melon earth from Dorton, the new edition of Miller, Hitt's book on wall fruit, Mr. John Ray's Methodist. Kin by close blood, Miss Rebecca Snook, Mr. Gilbert White's father's sister. So precise they are in the degrees of kinship, and yet how these humans differ in appearance compared to the resemblance of tortoises one to another, kin or no kin. Mr. Gilbert White was always struck by the fact that I recognized Miss Rebecca Snook. She comes into the courtyard waving a lettuce leaf, calling from on high, Timothy, Timothy, who else could it have been? In 40 years only a few humans ever entered that courtyard. Gardeners, maids, young whites, select friends, Mr. Manning, the doctor, each one as different as a rook from a redbreast. Was Mr. Gilbert White never struck by the fact that Miss Rebecca Snook recognized me? If another of my kind had walked up to her on that pebbled path, could she have told the difference, or would that tortoise have been Timothy too? She knew little enough about me in the end. I was much taken, Mr. Gilbert White wrote of me, with its sagacity in discerning those that do it kind offices, for as soon as the good old lady comes in sight, who has waited on it for more than 30 years, it hobbles towards its benefactress with awkward alacrity, but remains inattentive to strangers. Thus not only the ox knoweth its owner, and the donkey its master's crib, but the most abject reptile and torpid of beings distinguishes the hand that feeds it, and is touched with the feelings of gratitude. Good old lady she was, yet consider the levity, the dry prolixity of Mr. Gilbert White's words, the casual human irony when talking about animals, awkward alacrity, most abject reptile and torpid of beings, this I expect. Ox and donkey I pass by, as I do owner and master. Such words come naturally to humans, students of property as well as kinship. Kinship is a property in each other. But place Miss Rebecca Snook in a brick box apart from her natural kind, where she cannot eat her natural food or dig her natural bed. Let her be fed twice a day, albeit cheerfully, by one who keeps her there. Be kind and withhold the drowning rains, the killing frosts, year after year for 40 years. Would she say she has been waited on? Or would another word occur to her? Miss Rebecca Snook preserved the empty shells of other tortoises. On a lacquer table inside the house, in a room over the hall, small and hinged like double-lidded snuff-boxes, she dressed her hair with hawksbill combs. A pair of box turtles roamed some distant province of the garden well beyond my walls. Once upon some other time, were they rumor only? To her nephew in those days, I am chiefly Miss Snook's present living tortoise. The emphasis is his and mine. Thus a history of tortoise husbandry among the Snooks. I was the leaseholder of my own existence in Ringmer, awaiting the final freehold of death, but it was she who died late one winter, early March, earthed and still I lay. Aged nearly 86 she was, ancient for a human, merely respectable for a tortoise. Sexton buried her beside the body of Mr. Henry Snook in Ringmer Church. St. Mary the Virgin, a few grim words, full of the hope but not the rejoicing of spiritual continuance. Common grave a hibernaculum, till their desired arising in some later better world. How long they will wait for that spring, no one at the graveside can say. 40 years I watched Miss Rebecca Snook capsizing. Profusion of days killed her in the end. She died an ancient in her village, revered as much for being old as for being neighborly, charitable, dutiful. She taught me how it is to be human, kind, unkind, agile, halt, forgetful, almost sick with memory, corrupted and hectored by time. What afflicts these beings more than their longevity, their pride, their attitude, is the sad dissolving of the pith itself, badly fitted for the age they attain. Blood pooled when she sat, bones disconnected, skin turned to crepe. She became more and more an affair of cloth and stiffeners, a lady's maid construction, native vigor sapped. Harder and harder to bend down, harder and harder to stand up, little to eat and still less sleep. Could she see that I was not keeping pace with her, that she was aging on her own without me? I receded from her, she from me, and so she never knew that in 40 years of her own aging I had barely aged a day. The secret of our longevity, the tortoise is, young to the very end. It was a well-intended slavery living at Ringmer, apprenticed for life in the role of curio, forever bounded by 4 brick walls, fed by human hands. I was fashionable, you see, we were fashionable, the tortoises, a fashion only just beginning, not in Ringmer or Selborne alone. Tortoises all across the ecclesiastical countryside, none of us native. Find a clerical establishment of a certain outlook, and behold, tortoise in the garden. Vicars and curates examine the reptiles the way they examine the clergyman's intelligence or Ecton's guide to parish incomes. Consult us round Easter like clocks. Who rises? A tortoise a century old returns to life in a neighboring village. The report goes out. Mr. Loveday's tortoise at Caversham surfaces. Mr. Loveday writes to say so until the day the old man is gathered in, like a ripe stalk of corn. Out goes the news when I surface in Ringmer. The vicars humiliate themselves with us. A tortoise lives even longer than a bishop, yet they cannot quiet their humanness. Humility never comes naturally to their meditations, pride of the vertical, assurance of those who wear hair, even if not their own, pomp of warm-bloodedness, and equilibrium they mistake for rationality, over certainty about their station in life. In the book that made his name and mine, Mr. Gilbert White writes these words: "It is a matter of wonder to find that Providence should bestow such a profusion of days, such a seeming waste of longevity, on a reptile that appears to relish it so little as to squander more than 2/3 of its existence in a joyless stupor, and be lost to all sensation for months together in the profoundest of slumbers. A clerical toast, Providence, and a profusion of days. Mr. Gilbert White's nightly stupors, how joyful are they? Is he lost to sensation in his own profound slumbers, or does he sometimes dream, as I do, more vividly than waking itself? Where is the particular profit in his personal longevity? Mr. Gilbert White values the open eye more than the shut. Common mistake. The sensation I lose in hibernating is the one of separation, of having been plucked from my ancestry so many years ago. Mr. Gilbert White would be surprised to learn how deeply I relish my longevity, how infinitely it has been extended since I was stolen from myself. Clerics number their days by numbering hours, question their God, as if we were skulls tumbled out of a swollen graveyard, dug up from under the church paving, no being apportions its lifespan. To them a tortoise seems to squander its existence, dozing too often, no work at hand, living on and on and on. If so, then their God must have squandered existence too. The worst of the clerics look upon us as meal gone missing. Walking tureen of turtle soup, glare at their congregation in the same hungry way. The best of them see us as an inherent mystery. Perhaps that is why Mr. Gilbert White watches so closely. The real question he knows: why any creature is allotted time on this earth, no matter how brief or how long. He knows this, even if he hides the question from himself. Burying done, Mr. Gilbert White, nearly 60 years old, prized me out of my winter's depression in Miss Rebecca Snook's brick courtyard, not the picture of resurrection he preaches from the pulpit. Captain of salvation with a trowel in his hand, parson's black coat and mud-stained shoes, probing in a shallow graveyard for a soul to raise, I hiss at him for disrespect, his unseasonableness. He places me in a wooden box filled with earth and moss. Shipboard again for me, I think, seaborne back to the Sicilian coast, to my antique city. Great wrongs set right at last. But no, 80 miles and post-chaises, dismal hostlery, rocking and pitching across the south of England, through the child-rime villages of Uckfield, Cockfield, Horsham, and Dorking. My only contentment, Mr. Gilbert White's retching for the violence of the vehicle's motion. I know now he intended an act of kindness, also a chance to watch me more closely. My imperfect reamered oratory, meager winter clay on my back, wilted shade, these he had witnessed. He ignored my hissing as I ignored his roomy coughing, did his best to cushion me from the concussions of travel by post-chaise, from which he suffered far more than I did. And so on, not to the sea, but to another clod of houses, another fearsome lot of humans, though less forbidding after 40 years among them, to this place, to Selborne, a town not high on the chalk downs like Ringmer, but lodged in a crevice between the hills, under the beeches and oaks, sheltered veil beneath the winds, arrived at last, surrendered into a garden beneath the brow of the hanger. Just as spring begins, 40 years after first being carried into this damp woolen country, suddenly a sweet green season, a hint, even in March, of what is to come. Peaches and nectarines bloom on the only wall in sight. Grapes thrive on the house itself, living borders of shrubs and flowers instead of the mute red walls of my former courtyard, laurel, laburnum, and jonquil, crowded with birds all summer long, cascades of scent, blossom, and pollen almost overpowering when the sun lifts the dew from the garden. Frogs croak as I come fully awake, studding ponds with their spawn. Nuthatch clatters in the woods, early swallows flitter, bees above the cucumber frames, waiting for Mr. Gilbert White to open the lights, blossom inside daubed with honey to encourage the setting of fruit. Willows flower in the coppices, stormcock nests in the garden traffic to save her brood from the magpies, hedgehogs mind the grass walks for plantain roots. Puff balls and fairy rings surface, the woodlark sings in air all night long. Atmosphere already crowded with insects, rising and falling in sunlight, streaming down the hanger, gossamer. A man called Thomas appears that first day. Mr. Gilbert White asks him to dig a hole for me, as unexpected as if I had been asked to dig a grave for Miss Rebecca Snook, places me in it himself. I dig out and march twice over the precincts of the garden, almost gratified in my journey jumbled, winter-dreary state. The extent of my no dimension The confines seem more than ample, smooth avenues of sand and grass and brick, long brick walk from the kitchen to the wicket gate, glimpse of the board statue of Hesperian Hercules in the distance, pausing from his labors, ever patient in the great med, concourse of turf thick beneath my claws, now to do something about the weather. Here I roam at large, stand at the edge of the ha-ha, and survey the spacious world. If rain disturbs my reflections, I withdraw to the rhubarb or the lee of the cucumber frame, salad myself on the grass walks, devour what lettuces I choose, even to the detriment of Mr. Gilbert White's table, sojourn among the melons and the cardoon trunks, the cabbage cordons, meditate in the onions, the carrot ranks, the asparagus forest, muse near the hedge against Benham's yard, where chickens wait for the wheat-sheaf wagons to pass. I lie abroad among hyacinths, pause to feed upon a globe thistle, bathe in the liquid scent of peonies, feast on the leaves of poppies. Poppies! That first Selborne autumn I sleep under a marvel of Peru. In the warm shelter of the fruit wall, disbelieving glowworms twinkle in the lanes. I drowse my way toward another rude English winter. Hen coop over my back to keep the dogs from nosing too closely. Mr. Gilbert White affords me a good armful of straw. Is he this kind to all his parishioners? Benevolence on his part, and if awkward, that is because one creature's courtesies are so often another's insults. It took me many months among them to trust that humans could keep from falling over. Their paces forward and backward still seem little more than a falling forestalled 1 foot at a time. Side-to-side shuffling of a raven, not nearly as solid on their feet as a hen scratching after crumbs in the street, tottering two-legged stilt-gaited beasts. Only at a distance can I see them whole, against the quincunx on Baker's Hill, cutting the sainfoin, tacking vines along the fruit wall when I am resting in the laurel hedge. Up close they steeple over me, eclipsing the sun, pale pompion heads lurching across the sky, as if the beeches had walked down from the hanger to lower over the haymakers. For a time I flinched whenever a human approached, especially Mr. Henry Snook, who carried such a stoop of belly before him. The feet would stop, but the top might timber round to me. I still doubt the stability of the species, all that brain bulk merely to prop them up, or are they less top-heavy than they appear? Thunderstorm visits Selborne. Vast floods, hail near 2 feet deep. Bottle blue wind uproots beech trees on the hanger, streaks down the street, tearing thatch and tiles from the roofs of the village, battering windows, toppling chimney pots, and felling old wooden Hercules in the great med, scarcely levels a single human. Still, to see Goody Hammond on hands and knees weeding among the lettuces, the relief is not hers alone. How these humans dispose themselves, unlike anything else in creation, or rather like everything else in creation all at once, legs of one beast, arm of another, proportions all awry to a tortoise's eye, torso too squat, too little neck, vastly too much leg, hands like creatures unto themselves, senses delicately balanced, and yet each sense dulled by mental acuity, reason in place of a good nose, logic instead of a tail, faith instead of the certain knowledge of instinct, superstition instead of a shell. Postures stiffen as age and religion set in, yet even the ancient ones fling their limbs in all directions, restless as a poet with mites, as if by rising into an upright gait humans had forgotten how to set their extremities at ease. A couple rushes from St. Mary's, Farmer Turner, 71, and his housekeeper bride, Rose Rockin, 69. A jig in their steps despite their age. Miss Andrew Eddy, the vicar's window, still rides her mare from Selborne to Alton and back, tumbling if the horse tumbles, as it sometimes does, skirts wrung in the dust, defensive as a hedgehog. Mr. Thomas Barker, by no means young, starts up for the breakfast table, runs a race around Baker's Hill against Samuel, his son, not half his age, timed by Mr. Gilbert White's watch, 1 minute and a quarter for the straight-bellied old man, less than a minute for the young one. Mr. Barker rides 118 miles in 3 days, from Linden to Selborne, walks ahead, wig in hand, while the horses bait themselves at an inn, as though they had hired him to scout the way. A sandy road through dappled shade. The thatcher, Richard Butler, laying bright new thatch, clambers over the ridge poles in the village, climbs atop mounds of hay in the barnyard, roofing the ricks against winter, shilling a 9-piece for feaching of a heavy rack, he likes to say, nimble as a titmouse hanging upside down, 2 of a kind, titmouse pulling straws from the eaves with its beak, undoing the thatcher's work, giving houses a ragged appearance. A man in a dry year climbs 63 feet down Mr. Gilbert's white well, like a bat in a chimney to gnaw the bacon, climbs back out when he's done with his cleaning, carries towels and marbles thrown in long ago. What surprises Mr. Gilbert White isn't the in and out. It's the sight of his old towels and marbles. Farmer Town of more than ordinary girth gets a leg up from the wide-eyed ostler at the compasses, rolls onto saddle like an over-full soap sack. The horse widens its legs without looking round, cuts a fine figure on horseback, Farmer Town believes. The real drama is dismounting. Richard Horley edges a hip and knee under the outstretched hind leg of Miller, Mr. Gilbert White's ailing portmanteau horse. Miller leans against the blacksmith. Leg goes limp, sole of the hoof upturned. Miller reaches round to tug at the farrier's apron, a tangle of human and equine limbs. In the meadow the dairymaid pitches herself beside a spotted cow's udder, leans her head against the plank. 2 teats for the calf standing opposite, the rest for her. Shearer and sheep move almost as one, cotillion of wool. Mr. Ralph Churton absently picks his teeth with the nib of a pen. Body going about its business while the mind is elsewhere. Probes an ear with a twist of paper, reaches right around behind himself to uncrevice his breeches. The elegant scratch of one inaccessible spot on their spines with an ivory tool contrived for the purpose of the brass end of a walking stick, the rest rub up against a tree or fence like a fatting hog on a wattle pin. Notable woman and her girl in the top garden, 24 bushels of hops they pick at a single September day, always a gambling crop, in good years 30 tons from the hop grounds of Selborne, in good years 3 shillings a day, 2,000 pounds to the parish as a whole, all from the dexterous fingers of women and girls. When a tempest destroys the Kentish crop in Canterbury Fells, there are cheerful faces in Selborne. In bad years, hop women complain of the cold, wetted through and through in the picking. Gleaners come home from the wheat stubbles, loaded with bundles, children burdened no less. Over head and ears in the sheaves, their weight in grain and straw and spiders. Young of this village hang by the knees, that puzzling joint from tree limbs. I watch in amazement, also horror. Blood rushes to the head, roar of red ocean in their ears. Children roll sidelong down the bostel, pitch into summer cocks from fences and barneys, vault streams on the back of a pole, ride the oxen in their stalls when the farmers aren't looking, recline upon horses as though their backs were broad as the sheep-down itself. Not a child in Selborne who hasn't been bruised or broken willingly, laughing until tears come in earnest, smelling like loam and still pond, like horse, sheep, pig, and the dung of each, sour, wary tang of unwashed human flesh. And Daniel Wheeler's boy? Daniel Wheeler's boy is an ape of emotion, an imp of impulse, walks the length of the ha-ha on his hands, shins up the maypole to touch the fane, hops down the brick walk to the destruction of Rover and Fifield, who bark as they would at intruders, lad to plunder the honey buzzard's nest in the beech tops, worry hippos until they desert this parage, climb down a cavern newly opened under the cartway, display an agility either less or more than human. This is the boy that is chosen. Her insinuous neck encompasses everything within its reach, forward and backward, upward and down, curving and recurving as she hunts in the stream motionless. Even the human arm is not this lithe, yet the heron cannot sit on her tail. Long leg thrown over the rail of a peat cart, as I have seen William Marshall do, cannot quote gospel with a pipe of tobacco thrust into the corner of her mouth. In spring the small tribe of vipers reappears as I am surfacing, circling all the way round upon themselves, but the purchase extreme flexibility at the cost of extremities, becoming a single extremity. Their suppleness is all horizontal. Viperdam cannot lean doubled over against an oak tree, like a reaper giving out in summer's great heat. Vipershire cannot halt at arms like a soldier in Burgoyne's light horse, pausing in his march over the Sussex Downs to Portsmouth in America, cannot spit into the bushes while he makes water standing like a common hind. Young vipers, already vipers at birth, gaping and menacing, but they cannot kneel on a brick floor with a scrub brush, beat up butter and print it, as the girls of this village are taught to do. Cannot whisk the nose flies that fret the horses as they plow, little baskets tied over the muzzles. Frogs migrate across the parish in July, creatures no larger than the nub of my tail, trooping into the lanes in vast numbers to the top of the hanger, forelimbs and hind limbs as different from each other as human arms and legs. How do their forelimbs serve these amphibians? Perhaps only in what Mr. Gilbert White delicately calls their armours. Intrigues notorious to every creature in Selborne, frogs sticking upon each other's backs for a month together in spring, yet the inestimable frog tongue sings only the same vernal tune every year, incapable of gossip. Mr. Gilbert White reads the marriage service soberly. In the time of man's innocency, mystical union, not by any to be enterprised, to satisfy men's carnal lusts and appetites like brute beasts that have no understanding, wishes as he reads, that the bride were as slender-waisted as his hayrick at the end of a bitter winter, knowing glances in the congregation, whispered word among the wives, some of whom came less than virginal to wedlock themselves, no shame at all from the frog's point of view, no cause to vary one's song, endlessly corpuscent, endlessly concupiscent melody of earth. Agility, dexterity, these are not enough for humans. Not enough to be able to see most of one's body at a glance, necessary also to witness one's very own face, to know it in the glass, the shop window, the knife blade, the pond, to wink at oneself, to grin like a horse with lips pulled back, to offer oneself the compliment of a sly urbane glance, as if one wouldn't know oneself coming down the street, judging that face, those features, as if they belonged to a stranger, not a bad-looking fellow. How this blue satin becomes my complexion, a metaphysical dexterity exceeding all the rest of creation. And what are humans stranger than this? To live in a world peopled by their own reflections, by shadows that rise up, lifelike, to claim relation, not in puzzlement or hostility like a dog before the strange scentless beast in the mirror, not in blank unnoticing like a water eft on the edge of its well bucket, unable to admire its yellow belly, take in its black warty fin and tail, but to greet oneself knowingly like Mr. John Mulso, his reflection more intimate, better loved than even than his well-loved family, demands more easily satisfied, more easily disregarded, such a welcome surprise when that bold laughing face turns up, looking back unexpectedly at a hallway mirror, so comfortably disinclined to exert itself, engaging weak, distinguished profile, so easy to dismiss when dinner calls, only to turn up in the silver, a perfect companion, how elaborate the mirror's protocol, how decorous, how it resists certain angles. Miss Molly's White's only affectation is quoting Latin, yet she tries to behold her backside while standing beside the parlor window, judging the effect of her newly turned ribbon. The glass refuses to show the hind side to her. For the rear view, humans must take each other's word. They do so with characteristic reluctance. In all my life I have never seen either of my hind feet. I surmise their shape from my front feet, and from the feel of being in them, from encounters with my own kind long ago. Much less have I seen the ridge line of my carapace, or the modeling of my undertiles. I only intuit that my tail is there, and were I to come upon my face as it came upon me, it would look back at me implacably, unvarying. I wear a good round expression suited to all my needs, to every occasion, as do most creatures on this earth, and every day and Sunday coronation and burial face. To see it once would be to have seen it for all time. Not like the molten features these humans wear. They look again and again and never find the same visage twice. Miss Henry White stares into her hand mirror as though it were a fraud upon her intelligence, always showing her the wrong reflection, a woman older and somehow coarser than she expects to find. Not at all the woman within. I do not live in a prison of choices like humans. I have the one gait faster or slower, stand on all my feet or rest on my plastron, extend my limbs and head and tail, or not, mobility limited by human standards, flight limited by avian standards, all the suppleness necessary to a tortoise, balance perfect. What would I do with those human paces and postures, those abrupt gestures? Useless in a solitary creature, I look at those mobile faces and see a desperate urge for company. I look at that upright posture and see only sore necks and punishing feet. Mr. Gilbert White ponders my carapace, supposes that my shell imprisons me. Does the skull imprison the brain? Coffined is the word that occurs to more than one of his friends. They will know when they are coffined how inapt that word is. Mr. Gilbert White suspects that my inability to step out of my shell precludes all activity and disposition for enterprise. As if what goads these people into labor is their lack of armor, I feel no want or limitation. The living day is enterprise enough. Humans confuse the matter of shell and tortoise, container for the thing contained, talk as though they were two and not one, as though the part of the tortoise that is not the shell were as stout as the carapace itself, a structure Mr. Gilbert White has written of my own that would secure it against the wheel of a loaded cart, an experiment he hesitates to try. Each creature judges the condition of others and finds all but its own imperfect. Rover sleeps on his belly in the grass, one ear pricked for a moment, then topples over, waking him up. A gelding in the aftergrass scratches its jaw with a hind hoof. Wish I could do the same when smotherflies shower down or lice prevail or fern chafers invade the garden, but then a grass horse cannot carry its stall with it when lying out on rainy nights. Bantam hens sprawl in the yard after ruffling a cloud of dust into their feathers, wings and legs extended, eyelids sealed like death on a hot summer day. Should the sparrowhawk stoop to the terror of village dames, safety lies too far away for the chickens. Unless Will Tanner and his gun are ready, Sparrowhawk can have none of me. Sheep of the parish seem the most pampered of beings, fortunes tied intimately to humans, carefully washed and shorn in June, flocks closely tended, moved as often as possible to graze on fresh grass or green wheat or fields of spoiled barley, belly deep in their proper food. Yet when rains fall, sheep die. Even on so wholesome a spot as the commons, on low ground they rot, seeming to breed maggots. Ewes die in lambing, lambs that come in the wrong weather freeze where they fall. Some winters the flocks tear their fleece, trying to get at the lice that tease them. Magpies ride their backs, eating the lice. Sheep are little aware, Mr. Gilbert White notes, that their eyes are in no small danger, and that their assiduous friends would be glad of an opportunity of picking their bones. The humans, assiduous friends of sheep, are the ones to pick their bones at last. Mutton and grass lamb, one butcher Hale has done with the flock. Even the Selborne rooks, playful as they are, tumbling on wing in the gaiety of their hearts, plagued by their own society, constant fighting, perpetual destruction of nests, proceedings, Mr. Gilbert White notes, inconsistent with living in such close community. Soot-dark birds, thousands of them, wheeling through the air as they gather on their nests in the rook village on the hanger at evening. Dusk rings with obstreperous complaint, unneighborly contention before they retire to roost in the woods of Tisted or Ropley with the last gleam of light, rook chiding over the common resemblances of murmuring. So Mr. Gilbert White fancies the cry of a pack of hounds in hollow echoing woods, or the rushing of the wind in tall trees, or the tumbling of the tide upon a pebbly shore. The fond illusion of distance, romantic effect of perspective. Mr. Gilbert White would loathe such clamorous, dissenting neighbors any closer at hand, as bad in their own way as fumes from the charcoal making in Farmer Spencer's orchard. And what do the rooks on high make of Mr. Gilbert White and his fellow humans? Is he the subject of their speculations, born of perspective, as they peer down on Selborne? Do they tell a story about the slight, flightless man who lives beyond the ha-ha? Do they admire humans or fear them from that distance? Or do they notice only the rook's splendid chaos of their own domestic squabbles? Above all, Mr. Gilbert White is a man of system, naturalist, physico-theologist. He lives in inches and ounces and hours and degrees. Matter flows in upon him. New information crowds in every day. He examines the forest sand through a microscope, smooth from collision, a yellow color, watches the weather glass closely. Supine is the man who fails to put out his thermometer. Weather on March 20, 1780, the day I was first set loose in Selborne, dark, moist, and mild. 50 degrees, southwest wind, full moon, crocuses in high bloom, a matter record. Mr. Gilbert White chronicles rain and snow and barometric pressure, as if they were baptisms and burials and marriages in the parish register. The death of Anne Wheeler, aged 24 last year, or the union of William Trimming and Elizabeth Bartholomew, the burial just a few days ago of Mary Burby, aged 16, of this parish, by me, Gil White, curate, 16 years and gone, a Mayfly's life. The human year 1751, Mr. Gilbert White records, was one of the wettest years in the memory of man. He is able to report that the 24th of August, 1764, is the fourth most beautiful harvest day that ever was seen. Glass very high. Those that had the most patience will have by much the best corn, he declares, like the person he is. He identifies 439 local plants: traveler's joy, tway blade, eye bright cow wheat, go to bed at noon, knee holly, or butcher's broom. Knows the common tongue for plants, and the learned one too, which birds possess a local name, the sit-ye-down, and which don't, regulus non cristatus. Mr. Gilbert White items the fishes in Grace's stream, and the Wellhead stream. Bull's head or miller's thumb, trout, eel, lamprey, and stickleback, packs them in a little earthen pot full of moss, bound for London to be engraved, tracks the margins to discover the watervole where it swims and dives, probes the oat ricks for the grand rendezvous of harvest mice, clocks the rate at which the eyed owl feeds its young once every 5 minutes, beginning at sunset when mice start to run. He works at sorting the profusion of beetles, understanding the ants. Midges like smoke as they rise follow on a warm May morning. Early black grape climbs the study wall, Miss Rebecca Snook's variety. Thomas stands at the vines all morning, removing an infestation of beetles, a private passion of his own, killing them one by one, moving on to the gooseberries. In the window above, the scent of spices and stale flesh, damp feathers, acrid air. Mr. Gilbert White works at a table, eviscerating a long-legged plover, drawing the entrails, stuffing its skin with salt, pepper, and alum, ginger, cloves, and camphor, a little down the throat. Some toe in the abdomen for a lifelike shape. Divides the weight of the bird by its length of leg. The result, he notes, a 10-foot flamingo. The study is full of small corpses, labeled, shelved, and preserved. Villagers and country people, humans generally, are always good for a supply of small corpses. Boys especially, knock at the door means a dead bird in a male child's hands, clutch of bottled eggs in a poor woman's basket, limp carcass over the shoulder of a yeoman's son. Lord Stowell serve it with a curious pheasant. Some creatures die in Selburne, sheep and pigs, because that is their purpose. Some, the otter, die merely because they stray into sight. Others are sacrificed, foul or by the hundreds, to the sporting instinct in humans, a passion almost beyond inhibition. Mr. Gilbert White is one of the few that have stilled that instinct in himself. When I was a sportsman, he likes to now say of his youth, pointers and turnip fields, stone curlews rising from the crop, gunpowder and shot, 6 pence for gun cleaning, regular items in Mr. Gilbert White's ledger long ago, inhospitably fetching down our visitants, the birds of passage, writes Mr. John Mulso of those far-off days. Out comes firearm now to protect the garden, to keep house sparrows out of the house martins' nests, greenfinches from the blossoms, blackbirds and thrushes from plundering the fruit, and he fires at birds, or causes them to be fired at, to answer his insatiable curiosity, to know what he sees. Mr. Gilbert White commands the muzzles, the nets, and the traps of the entire parish and beyond, causes a nuthatch to be shot in the act of clattering its beak against wood, to know whence the sad sound arises. A friend procures a sandpiper from Mr. Gilbert White's collection. Another a butcher bird. A neighbor drowns a house martin for him in early May. To learn whether martins are lean and emaciated when they appear for the season, fat and fleshy and dead is how that one is, stomach full of the legs and wings of beetles. Thus he ensures the accuracy of his autopsy, evidence of his own eye, direct examination, only to be trusted, antidote to the bad habit of comparing one animal to the other by memory. The fallacy of analogous reasoning, all the naturalist's knowledge, writes one of that kind, comes from killing animals and examining them when dead. Mr. Gilbert White preserves for reference a pair of harvest mice in brandy, stores specimens from Gibraltar, packed long ago by Miss John White on her husband's behalf, dried plants and preserved birds, a little cargo of curiosities, accidental samples of the vine-eating beetles that preoccupy Thomas, boxes from Levant's ship, quarantined at Stangate Creek, loaded on the Southampton coach to be left at the Swan Inn at Alton, a large fine Vespa, Merops apiester, puffin, razorbill, various fishes, a vulture's head and feet, the rest of the carcass eaten by the starving fisherman who found it dead and floating in the sea. Mr. Gilbert White finds the ring ousel, then dressed for the table, well tasted and juicy, in high condition for the plumpness, bitter and shot in a shrub wood, tastes like teal, though not so delicate, intestines covered with fat, bird that goes cracks in wet meadows and bean fields, a landrail, turns out fat and tender, flavored like the flesh of a woodcock, with a large and delicate liver. Does Mr. Gilbert White merely keep the bills of animal mortality? Does this system's curiosity create a market? But up springs a market for animal flesh wherever there are humans. Female woodcock shot in Selburne, sent to London, finds a buyer as it is being carried along the street. Porter offered a guinea for it, so succulent is the purchase. Daniel Wheeler's boy comes into the garden. He sizes me up, thinks of avoirdupois and shillings and scarcity. I weigh 6 pounds 13 ounces and am extremely rare. Original price half a crown more than 50 years ago. Undervalued even then. But Daniel Wheeler's boy has no market for me. I live in the asparagus of his only buyer. I size him up, too, shanks like hop poles. Malevolent squint, no market for him either. Not if England is at peace. System isn't everything, but without system, Mr. Gilbert White notes, the field of nature would be a pathless wilderness. He has never seen a pathless wilderness. Selborne Parish is groomed as clean as the brick floor in his kitchen. Woods down Heath Forest, mead. Fields, common, stream bottom pasture. Bog, pond, highwood, hedge, coppice, stubbles, hanger. Each shaped to human use, rural economy. Everything has its consequence. This is system, too. Rooks destroy their neighbors' nests in the beech tops on the hanger. Fallen nest twigs kindles the fires of the poor. Rooks die in a freezing mist, wings ice together. The poor eat well for a time. Silkwood abounds in the bogs, beautiful bright chestnut color, soft and pliant. Women make besoms from it, from dusting of beds, curtains, carpets, and hangings. Swan crashes into a window in Dorton, sold to the miller at Hawkey for pound or oven. Grass is dry, so the price of butter climbs, and the taste of mutton improves. Farmers plant turnips everywhere now, ever since I came into this country. So the flesh of wood pigeons loses its savor. Turnips abound, so lean sheep rise in value. Oaks drop a heavy crop. Prices of pigs go up. Barley down. Villagers drive barrow hogs into the highwood and onto the hanger. They feed on beech mast. Milk sows eat yew berries in the road to their sorrow. Hogs graze on the stubbles, trouble the lanes, dig what troubles they can, grub up the acorns that mice have buried one by one. Some years the hogs force their way into Mr. Gilbert White's outlet, even to the ha-ha before his people fall upon them with curses and cries. The poor gather acorns, too, sell them for $1 a bushel. Selborne puts up its hogs to fatten in October. Killed and tubbed in January, half a bushel of salt, 2 ounces of saltpetre well trod. Some years they die very good pork. Hollyburn Traveller walks into Selborne. 2 cur dogs on a string, sullen as himself, searches hedges, coppices, hangers, divides the troubles he finds, half to the landowner. For $1, Mr. Gilbert White learns the art and mystery of truffling, but $1 will not give him the nose he needs, nor bend it close enough to the ground. To those of us already down here, a truffle is an upwelling of musk, as plain as the July stench of jasmine that drives Mr. Gilbert White from his chamber, as dark as the pitch and tar on newly shorn sheep, depriving them of their old familiar smell, confusing the sense of kinship. In summers the Selborne people gather rushes in pastures and hedges and meadows. They strip them and soak them in bacon pot and scummings. For January's pigs, good clear light in the blackness, at the edges of day in the dark of season, and kitches and dairies. Mr. Gilbert White conducts a systematic study of rush-making, a question of class, careful wives of industrious labourers, small farmers lighting their way, to nephew Samuel Barker. Many gentlemen in Oxford had never heard of rushes, perhaps because they were gentlemen. The improvident poor burn halfpenny candles instead, which keeps them poor. The considerable trees are assessed as items of human property. Mr. Gilbert White counts the trunks of the wood he owns. 94 beeches, 3 ashes, 2 oaks, and sparrows hanger. 1 beech of particular nobility, measured annually, girth and height. A special attraction to trees were planted by old men when they were mere boys. Sowed an acorn himself by the alcove when he was 11. Now an oak 4 feet 5 inches around. He hews his beechen stock into planks, has them plunged into Mr. James Knight's ponds, to be made into mangers. The beeches on the hanger belong to Magdalen College. And to whom does Magdalen College belong? Woodcutters fell the woods, strip by strip, year after year. Hanger dreadfully denuded. Wild strawberries spring up among the stumps to be picked by children. Even the wild cherries, the merry trees, and the great bed have their use, decoys, drawing blackbirds to be shot by young Will Tanner, saving less the garden fruit. The very stars have their numbers as well as names. The comet appears to Mr. Gilbert White not as an extravagant mystery, another incident in the annals of superstition, but as an eccentric manifestation in the constellation Aries, beneath its 24th, 29th, and 51st stars, as listed in the English catalogue. Wonderful is the regularity observed by nature, Mr. Gilbert White writes. Wonderful. Cleanly in all her ways, cleanly, seldom works in vain, seldom. And of all these things, stars, trees, pigs, twigs, prices, crops, people, I am easiest to number, being sole of my kind. Weather is wild, creatures that stay out of human reach. Wild is what the villagers haven't yet clutched to themselves, beings that don't gather round to be touched to the sound of the feed pail, the sicking of the good women after their pigs before they are put up a fatting. Creatures that don't look up dog-like when they hear the word that means look up at me. Quail, Mab, Rover, Flyfield, Timothy. But no place as wild as Selborne Single Street. Nothing as wild as a pack of village boys, scenting six-pieces, drowning in their own secretions, breaking up the arch of a bricked grave merely to get at a wasp's nest, beating down swallows stooping under the eaves, twisting dolls' nests out of the ground with their forked sticks. Even the very nieces and nephews of Mr. Gilbert White, scores of them, considerate of my feelings, easy with kidney beans and cucumbers. Over fond of the word Timothy, perhaps, even they destroy pheasants' nests when gathering strawberries in Golay Wood. If the brute creation were wild in the human way, it would enter poor Selborne, pull down the houses and burn the hayricks, foul the wells and nail farmers to the barn ends. Other creatures find their uses. Oxen are yoked and prodded, goad and word. Horses harnessed or saddled, jumped and run and ploughed. Dogs commanded and as often obeyed. Cats and ferrets set in stealth upon rats. Crickets lodged in paper houses and sat chirping on sunny sills. No one expects me to go a-mousing or a-ratting or to guard the flock or herd the neat cattle, nor to be fatted and killed like a pig, or milked by dairymaids out in pasture, harnessed and dropped, set to lay, warred like rabbits, caught and kept in a cage like bullfinch, or nettled by larkers, beat down by bat-fowlers, or trapped in the downs like wheat ears by the shepherds, run down by dogs and men in horseback, dapped from the brook-head with mayflies mate, shot on the wing and stuffed in game pocket, prowed from my burrow with grass stalks with a vanished race of field crickets, neither fleeced nor sheared, not even anatomized, and filed for reference, and yet never let alone. My true position abroad in the bean field, gone forever, it seems to the humans. I should be very sorry to lose old a domestic, Mr. Gilbert White writes, that has behaved himself in so blameless a manner in the family for nearly 50 years. Blameless footman, worn-out cook-maid, imbecile serving girl, meek demeanor, self-effacing behavior, shuffle backward, silent at the door, very bread in one's mouth, not one's own. If attended to, it becomes an excellent weather glass, the curate says of me. If it composing a notice of public sale, blameless weather glass, domestic weather glass, self-dusting, self-calibrating, eats little, long life, accuracy guaranteed. Shell worthless to humans unlike hawksbills, wrong calipash, wrong calipee, waste too scant to spread on the garden, no song worth hearing, no skin worth tanning, no conversation worth taking down, no capers worth watching, only the one autumnal trick going underground, and the spring one coming up again, and the other trick, of course, longevity. Heat of Sicilia in spring, warm spreading sea, salt and light and stone, expanse of time, fit of place, that memory resides in my limbs, hidden nearly all the year round by Selborne's climate. The thought of it revives on the finest days, carrying myself in the depths of April, unseasonable snows, frosts, and icicles, into the settled warmth of late May, all I can do, and then I begin to feel nearly familiar ease. Summer established, perfect summer, these soft Selborne mornings, languid heat already in the air. The well sinks, martins gather loam in Gracious Street for their houses. Bantam hen brings out her chicks in ostentatious pride. Mr. Gilbert White takes note of all these things, measures the rain, brings the ballots forth, and he takes note of me. I occupy a corner of his eye whenever he is in the garden, always conscious this time of year of that first escape. I watch him watching me. Sometimes he even seems aware of being watched. Looks up from the sowing crop of parsnips, cutting a bottle-nosed cantaloupe. Finds me musing nearby, as if I were an unexpected melon just now ripening on the vine. Look of consciousness crosses his face, awareness of my awareness. Thousands of pairs of eyes in his garden, few of them able to make a human feel looked at, strangely impervious to the level gaze of a swallow or a bumblebee, no natural predators, unaware of the menace in a hedgehog's glare, blind to the query of a bantam's eye. Few creatures cast their wishes into a look. These alone catch a human's notice. Rover, Fifield, the parlor cat, the one wise scow, irritable gander, milk cow, saddle mare. Mr. Gilbert White watches me watching him. My gaze is as weightless upon him as the shadow of a mouth. He feels it anyway. Rare the human who bestows his confidence upon a tortoise, one occupant of earth to another. To acquit a reptile is an insuperable difference in breeding, unforgivable difference in kind. The sufferings of my solitude Mr. Gilbert White plainly feels, my hermit-like condition. But it is a mammal's conception of solitude. I was laid in solitude, hatched in solitude, all but conceived in solitude. One of the first great dictates of nature, Mr. Gilbert White notes, of maternal affection, but it is only as strong as the helplessness of the newborn. Humans at one extreme, tortoises at the other, and is he not feeling for himself? A man essentially solitary among so much kin, so many friends, so close to nature that only he knows how removed from nature he really is. The truth of my time among humans, a subject to their neglect, their forgetfulness, their most trivial intentions, as I am to their malice, as vulnerable to their wonder as their loathing, set loose in the garden now these dozen years ago. The country people quickly judge whether I concern them or not, their habit in most things, practical greed, not their business, they decide, a gentry affair. One of the curate's whims, like the board statue of the great ruddy Greek at the foot of the hanger, better for coaching an inside than to stand at the edge of the wood staring at one. I make no sense to Goody Hammond, no more than the sundial at the edge of the ha-ha, but I am as much a fact, not to be denied, no price in my continued presence day after day. Now and then a naturalist, rare as a merganser, descends upon the village, a feast of observation for Mr. Gilbert White, company of his own particular kind. They walk the parish together. No bird, plant, or insect came before them unascertained, he writes. The naturalist appraises me, turns me over in their minds. They would like to ascertain the hinges of my being, have me out of myself, find my cognomen, my synonym, the Linnean system. Myself unnecessary once Latin name is found. They would like to answer the question of my prolonged existence as if it were not implicit in theirs as well. But in the end they consider I am alien to this district, visiting from nowhere, no notion what place I am fitted to. Vagabond on this soil, a condition with no meaning to a naturalist, subject to a certain disregard, therefore, less instructive than the merest mole cricket churring by the night. Here in the land of its ancestors, I worry visitors even now. Country had laid spreading blacksmith's cinders on the crocus and vine beds under the dining room window, struck down by the venom of my appearance, shovel in a brawny hand, forearm like oak, forehead too, dangerous creature. My shell silently absorbs me. Where best to strike the beast? St. George wonders, to strike it all? Thomas taps the window glass, spell broken, entirely his fault, Thomas says, forgot to mention me, steps outside, sets me among the larkspurs across the walk. Word of further explanation to the country lad. The humans glance in my direction. I give them nothing to see. Some of the vicarage ladies, Miss Etty's sisters, come to visit, enjoy the thought of shuddering at the thought of me. Parade through the garden once or twice a year, trailing fingers over the blossoms, massaging the apricots, devouring the currants. If they were blackbirds, they would be shot, drowned in treacle with wasps. The vicarage ladies lack Mr. Gilbert White's diverse tastes and nature, tolerate the winged creation as long as it keeps its distance, swan on a still pond, nightingale in the French mere, chicken in a fricassee, accept the existence of quadrupeds with hair or fur, necessary creatures after all, conveyance, wool, joints of meat, reptiles entirely superfluous. I wonder that these ladies consent to inhabit their own flesh. What edifice is this delicacy to speak of? How do their cucumbers grow? Miss Rebecca Snook was of sterner stuff. The vicarage arrives. I am set out of the way among the artichokes, where the ladies are not likely to venture. Still, they worry that I will rush at their ankles. A mild suspicion of humans grows upon Mr. Gilbert White. The worst of their character so often prevails. Religion and the study of nature teach him to think it. Professional intimacy with parishioners, not prone to confession, but they do confide, will misbehave. Drunken farmer bawls the street before carrying his new bride, bawling too out of Selborne. Royal Navy kidnaps a carter's boy in an alehouse and hauls him off to sea. Paralytic strangles himself with a leathern thong. London crowds riot. French crowds behead their anointed king. The vicarage ladies will bruise wall fruit. Boys will torment squirrels. Never mind the unspeakable temptation of a tortoise to young scholars. There is too strong a propensity in human nature towards persecuting and destroying, Mr. Gilbert White writes. The rest of nature concurs. Miss Rebecca Snook was not inclined to pick me up. Mr. Henry Snook soiled his hands with me just once the day of my arrival, set me down upon the ground, and then looked for somewhere to wipe his hands, as if I oozed. Gardener's assistant teased a pretty young maid with me one summer morning, tried to embosom me upon her, and of his duties in that household. She followed him out of the parish, midriff swelling not long after. Then comes a pleasant morning in August 1775, Mr. Gilbert White visiting his aunt. I hear him searching the courtyard beds, never a long search. Find the hepatica, find the tortoise leaves above me part. He takes me up in his hands, closes me in a wicker basket lined with moss. Years since I was last picked up, much less basketed. Out of the gate with me under his arm, the first time leaves strutted beyond these walls since I was deposited within them. 35 years without a glimpse of the greater world. I peer at Ringbar through a slit between the basket ribs, down the hill toward the village center, through a door. Bell jingles overhead. Mr. Gilbert White opens the basket before I can glance about me. He lifts me into the pan and chop scale, hanging over a wooden counter, high above a stone floor. I step out of the pan and onto the counter. Mr. Gilbert White catches me and sets me in the pan again, but this time on my back. I do what any tortoise would, curtail myself. It is the power of being a tortoise, legs, head, and all but the least nub of my tail vanished. Shopkeeper spittled with scales which want to swing 6 pounds 3/4 and 1 ounce, he announced as Mr. Gilbert White scribbles on a piece of paper. Crowd of humans standing around him. Where did they come from? Roars with laughter. Shop suddenly fills with the brawling of human breath. A close sulphurous spraying. A pennyworth, Richard, for the old Sussex tortoise. Comes a shout, as though I were tobacco or malted barley. More laughter. One human wonders aloud what I'm worth in the king's coin. Whirled stub of filthy finger, dank with the fundament scent. The basso of its owner's body reaches inside the head shield of my carapace. Some village polyphemies, already blinded, search for no man. Mr. Gilbert White gently replaces me in the basket upright and closes the lid. 6 pounds 13 ounces. Shopkeeper's figures are wrung by the immeasurable weight of my fears. I thought it was the soup for me at last. I blame Miss Rebecca Snook for allowing the weighing, but I blame Mr. Gilbert White for the project. Insatiable curiosity, extravagant wonder, not the least assuaged by the consolations of his religion, and I blame him far worse for laying me on my back. May safety in mind, perhaps only his shopkeeper's convenience, a misplaced hope that I wouldn't void my fears in the scale. But in his desire to learn that I weigh 6 pounds 13 ounces on the 7th of August, 1775, Mr. Gilbert White violates the inflexible law of uprightness. Bad enough to pick me up, but he turns me over as though upside down were merely the left hand of right side up. There is only one posture to a land tortoise, 4 feet square on the ground, just as there is one orbit to earth, one heaven on a Selborne Sabbath morning. I was never weighed before, Mr. Gilbert White notes, but it seems to be much grown since it came. It was never weighed before, Mr. Gilbert White notes, but it seems to be much grown since it came, much grown and much wiser. Student of human nature, even then, after 35 years among them, student of myself in my red brick prison, student of circumstance. Pray let it be weighed every year, says one of Mr. Gilbert White's brothers. So it has been ever since. Twice a year I am a tortoise hung in a needy shop, as the poet says. Spring sun warms my carapace at last, let 2 days out of my winter's nest, and I find myself lifted from the grass. Autumn withers, nearly time to dig. I await what's coming, carried over Selborne, straight past the butcher's, across the plestor, through the door of Mr. Jack Burby's shop. Suspended on my back in the scales above the counter, like a cheese indifferent to up or down. Village boys crow like cockerels during the procession. Shopkeeper sleeps a cabbage leaf in the weighing pan first. Waits a moment or two while I ease myself before he tries to balance the scales. I have learned to be still, to trust Mr. Gilbert White. Never glance at the soot-darkened ceiling. The clutter of parcels and the boxes and ribbons, the nostrums and salts, the ledgers and rows of drawers and small jars keep my nostrils as tightly closed as my eyes. Can't stop my ears to the boys cheering. I presume that there will be no horror, none beyond lifting, carrying, prodigious height, curious rabble, inversion, and the return journey across the street, through the stable yard, and back to the garden. No soup and no slip, only the greatest care in handling me. In 13 years I have never been dropped among the boys' swift feet, never kicked head over tail, never rolled through the village along my equator, chased by dogs down Gracious Street or Hawker's Lane. I have merely been stood on my back, rocking side to side like a beached coracle. The meager harvest of those outings? The knowledge that my weight rises or falls by an ounce or two, as I feast or abstain, but scarcely at all over the years. Therefore, as Mr. Gilbert White notes, these reptiles do not, as some have imagined, continue to grow as long as they live. Therefore, indeed, consider the carapace. Even at hatching, I was no formless spawn, no Selborne infant able to grow which away without stopping. What other imaginings will Mr. Gilbert White refute at my expense? He picks me up one day in Ringmer, idle question on his face, feels my tail and feet, as much of my neck as I will allow, concludes that I have no perceptible pulse, as if I would keep my pulse where a human could touch it. What would be the point of all this armor, then? He forgets how discomfiting the incandescence of mammals feels to a reptile, their abruptness, the velocity of their existence, to live such long lives, at such terrible speed, and to get no further than if they had lived more slowly. In Selborne he strides down to the bee-stalls beside the balm of Gilead trees, carries his father's speaking trumpet, purchased in 1757, lifts the narrow end to his lips, and bellows at the hive. With such an exertion of voice, he writes, as would have hailed a ship at the distance of a mile. Gleaners down the Ewell look up from the corn. Men at the hop kilns pause. A naturalist, they know, is half a fool. Still the curate notes the bees pursued their various employments, undisturbed, and without showing the least sensibility of resentment. Who is the more rational in this case, the insect or the parson? Mr. Gilbert White approaches me with the same 5-shilling instrument, aims the bell of the trumpet into the laurel hedge, sharp intake of breath, cries out my name, as if expecting my shell to return to the echo. I react much as the bees do, not the least sensibility or resentment. best response to a naturalist, let him from what conclusions he may. Any reaction only raises new questions. The curate confesses to frequent returns of deafness, coming on for many years, not the villagers bellow at him, trumpets in earnest. Rural sounds lost to him at times, imitations his neighbors hear defiring during the great review at Bagshot Heath. Mr. Gilbert White does not, though news of it wakes pleasant memories of a review he witnessed half a life earlier. Thomas listens alone now for the Portsmouth evening gun. Mr. Gilbert White waits to feel it in his bones. Thomas harks to the stern curlews on their way to the uplands when he rises in the dark to brew. Reports their passing to his master. What jots down the fact. Is it not enough to shout in my ear? Mr. Gilbert White chronicles my liking for endive and gooseberry, how I told back the elder leaves of a cos lettuce with my feet, examines my excrement, discerns that I urine plentifully, emitting a chalk-like substance like a bird of prey. Who is privy to such matters among humans? Who surveys along them when he calls the consequences of eating? One more hypothesis remains to be tested, the amphibian one. Arid my shell, arid my hide, arid my very manner, and yet a man of system must not suppose that I am a native to dry land, even though he supposes that I am lonely. Amphibious tortoises do exist. Mr. John White saw them in Andalusia. Dr. Richard Chandler, vicar of the neighboring parish of East Wardham, has sent him in the Levant. William Derham, the physico-theologist, asserts that the tortoise is an amphibious animal, a footnote in its great work. The assertion looms over Mr. Gilbert White. Physico-theology, after all, or a demonstration of the being and attributes of God from his works of creation. Yet there is such a propensity in mankind towards deceiving and being deceived, Mr. Gilbert White cautions, that one cannot safely relate anything from common report, especially in print, without expressing some degree of doubt and suspicion. Therefore, better to try the question. Perhaps the curate wanted to try it years before in Ringmer. There in backward spring, in that brick-lined swamp, I was nearly amphibious by force. Perhaps he was prevented by Miss Rebecca Snook. She could stop nothing now. In the company of Dr. Richard Chandler, that prattling cockbird, the time comes at last, July of my first summer in Selborne, soft grey day, as Sunday, clerics at large in the afternoon. We put Timothy into a tub of water. Mr. Gilbert White notes, and found that he sank gradually, and walked on the bottom of the tub. He seemed quite out of his element, and was much dismayed. This species seems not at all amphibious. Footnote refuted. He is a narrow account of the incident, terseness expressing a naturalist's shame, dismay at his doings, far unequal to mine. This species seems not at all amphibious, bold conclusion of a brave venture. My legs begin to windmill over the water tub, rain water closes round me, loggerheads of that ancient coast slipping joyously into the sea, shells disappearing beneath the foam. They are nowhere to be seen. The memory seems almost shaming in the circumstances. I am not taken by the tide, borne upon by the counterpoise of the deep. I sink. The water doesn't sustain or welcome me. It soaks me like a week's worth of washing. I am merely a long-pampered tortoise, decades removed from my natural life, long standing at the bottom of the water tub in the south of England. Two male humans in wigs look down with expectant, distorted faces, waiting to draw the proper inference from my unhappiness. Next day they weigh me, and my unhappiness is complete. Mr. Gilbert White's house looms hard against the village street, cliff-like, muting the street sounds. A solid in appearance of the rock-clad clouds crowding a late spring sky. Roof tiles on the gables glower in the rain. The color of impending thunder. Here Mr. Gilbert White does the business of living. What opacity there is in his character I attribute to the sturdy walls of his domicile. He probes closely into the conduct and manners of every being in his parish, yet lives largely hidden from their sight like the swift. He cannot be so narrowly watched as those species that build more openly. No creature excels the human matters of medification. Mr. Gilbert White arrives on horseback from Newton Valence late at night and retires, makes his way through the dark house with the aid of a rushlight, dim glow passing from room to room, window to window, upstairs into the bedroom, over the kitchen, then out. If he stirs too often in bed, he steps down again and outside into the darkness to find Jupiter or Saturn. Sometimes through the parlor door, sometimes through the kitchen, to consider the dipper, to see how the moon is waning. There the glass stands, to visit if the night is warm, the necessary house hidden behind a screen of laurels, but then always outside and up to bed again. Summer means candlelit parties or tea, and the hermitage high on the hanger, a strong, substantial cot, well thatched, above zigzag patrons, foot of the pound field, large white cross to catch the eye, sweet afternoon above Selborne. Company of kin and neighbors, succulents of melons, acerbity of tea, set apart from all that labor in the world below, lifted above one's cares, London somewhere off in the distance, Brother Benjamin White's roomy shop, Horse's Head, 51 Fleet Street, old men in leathern doublets at the press, Sometimes the hermit appears, hairy gown, rosary beads, conical hat, rude belt, a Hampshire Crusoe, unmistakable features of a sibling white, wise but gaily antisocial, self-contained for 10 or 15 minutes, ascetic until the sandwiches, not quite the prophetic strain, flirtatious, happy to startle ladies, gothic fright, impersonating a mammal's motion of solitude, amused by his own gravity, the mild utterance of a minor poet. Even now the hermitage recalls the days long ago when 20 at a time might crowd its shelter, female visitors from the vicarage, dressed as shepherds and shepherdesses, much to the confusion of the actual shepherds who watched the good folk climb the zigzag path once in the afternoon and again by lamplight. A tent below the hangar in those days, striped pavilion at the crest of short life, Miss Etty and her maidens, those sweet fields, walking down the village to Mr. Gilbert White's house to be electrified in the evening, Mr. Thomas White's electrical machine, Brother John also an electrician, here standing on end. That fashion has passed, that youth, tents folded, ladies soundly married, no more electrifying. The machine is merely another weather device now, shoots fierce sparks, rings bells, and with a summer storm gathers near Lambeth. Tea party, cantaloupe party, down the hangar before darkness, down the zigzag into a deeper twilight, night clouding of the lowlands, along the brick walk. Welcome to the house, lights within, echo of its walls, comfort to the fire, candles, parlor, society of Miss John White, letters to write, a note in the journal, what blooms, what rain falls, what the glass did, how the wind quarters, whether the hops run out on their poles. If the hay is making, quiet stitching of time. Rural sounds almost never cease in June and July, voices of yeomen of the nearby fields, words that drive the horses, slaps of leather against wooden flesh, iron against iron and earth. Bells in the fields, St. Mary's open-mouthed ring floods the valley. Human enterprise is as wide as the sun's arc here in the north where the light scarcely dies. Selborne waits until late to withdraw into its brief midsummer sleep. Male glowworms follow the candlelight into Mr. Gilbert White's parlor. I approach the glimmer. It spills through open windows, under the flycatcher's nest in the vines, out onto the grass, flickering as moonlight ever does, catching the silhouettes of humans within. Copper cowls in the parlor chimneys, flocked satin paper on the walls, Italian veined marble, fine stout Turkey carpet, bought to Joseph Luck at the original carpet warehouse, Bread Street, Cheapside, in a week before Miss Rebecca Snook's death. Lively clatter of kins in such comfortable surroundings, nephews, nieces, brothers, sisters. Visitors crowd the months of summer and early autumn, appraising the changes in each other, in the garden, in the neighborhood. Some seek me out in the instant for a private interlude. Unchanged they find me, themselves as variable as always, some fit only for reading aloud at evening. Some sing, some sit silent, some the nieces play elegant lessons upon Miss Etty's harpsichord, borrowed for the occasion. Brittle notes swarm over the window case, ants across a well-polished tabletop, ordering and disordering themselves before expiring, reordered in the night air. Their importunate echoes haunt Mr. Gilbert White as he wakes in the mornings, deranging his meditations. Too clever, too mannered, his remembered music, lacking in memory, even the scant body of the instrument's voice, the complications of an inanimate box. Mr. Gilbert White's true music is the repeated, unresolved music of birdsong, melody that never finds the tonic again, resolved only in the being that utters it. Still air that absorbs it, season that prompts it. I listen, haunted too. Sometimes I hear the music nearby, just under the Portland sill. Other times I hear it from farther off, where it fades into the hedges, less substantial than the scent of the wind. And in that music, little as it is, there is all the elaboration of these humans are capable of. Order and disorder, ornament and element, wreck of their lives, jumbled together, weaving and interweaving in a curious succession, nights, animals taking place of days, rows of house fronts and rooftops, embroidery of the plantings in this garden, passion flowers beside the curate's street front door, courtesies of speech, all the regularity of this regular species. The evening damp has still not fallen, the air elastic yet. Young people enter the garden, leaning grave folks round the chimney, pleased to think themselves grave and old before such an early fire. Age is not intolerable if your shins are warm. The young ones whisper in the out-of-doors. They feel its presence on the grass plot beyond the ha-ha. Hushed by the twilight, these cousins, so confidential, so surprised to be grown so manly and womanly, so come to adulthood, so conscious weight of another's presence, saturation of being, grass pulsing in the night breeze all around them, put out at nurse and Selborne one by one, at the teat of some village good woman, suckling on the hanger, in the coppices, carried through the street in a morning errand, across the fields to bring beer to the reapers, fastened to a moist dug with a glutinous mouth, breast seeping like the climate of the Selborne, then drool down the infant's chin. What a wet species it is, entire village at suck, Molly White's Benjamin, now a thrashing young brat, taught to say Timothy when held out before me partial to roasted apples and the engravings of Mr. White's Crane Scott, as helpless as incapable as a new-picked cuckoo or squab young stolen from a swift's nest. Even in his second and third summers, entirely dependent on the vigilance of others' prior arrangement of instinct, very sure of that vigilance they are, that these humans, such is the power of instinct. Let it lapse in a single generation, that is the end of this species, for all its talk of reason and faith, through the wicket gate. On to the grass walk, and down the outlet they go, among the maple hedges, young of this human brood, as graceful as the vertical ever get, leaning on each other's arms, display of kinship, a solemn bond, and yet not nearly as tight as a flock of swallows on the wing. They walk deep into the night shadows, as a mating age, but mating curiously postponed, sombre joyful mass of the hanger blockading the low southern stars, as though it were kin as well, sheep down beyond its brow, like a small sky of grass, an inexplicable kindness to that precipice of chalk, its woods and brooks, white poplar at the foot of the bostel, patched, cut along the slope in my first Selborne autumn, troops of labourers, spades in hand, pyrites in the clay, ammonites in the chalk as they dig, gradual romantic walk up the face of the hill, for horses and heifers and humans not equal to the zigzag straight up the side, looming in summer, withdrawing in winter, height of Venus measured against the hanger, hour by hour shifts in the greeting of spring, beautiful rhymes, picturesque tinges, autumnal scenes, most lovely lights and shades, birds' eggs and nests, acorns and berries, smooth grotesque bark of the oldest beeches, fetid hellebores in the undergrowth, orchids and periwinkle and gentian. Whole childhoods hidden in its shade, ravens and thistledown launch from its heights, wind hovers and wood owls nest at its boughs. Villagers peer down the beech leaves onto their own habitations, good glazed stone and brick cottages, chambers above stairs, hop gardens sheltered by hedges, small bleached fields of wheat, oats, barley, sainfoin, turnips, gardens, enclosures, a rustic patchwork, smoke that rises when brush burns, when lime kilns fire, when winter comes, sun reek from the garden walks and roofs, pasture corners crowded with sheep gathering like evening fog, every rod under cultivation or care, the course of their own lives from thatch eve to grave. Yet how the nephews and nieces and their uncles love to shout from the top of the hanger. Village and life return the echo. They halloo just to see who responds. Tighter to patule ricobans, comes the cry from a steep balk above a hollow lane at the top of the Kingsfield. Tighter to patule recobans, answers the galley lane hop kiln, able to repeat 10 dactylic syllables without fault. Mr. Edmund White, one of his nephews, comes over on the August evening from Newton Vallet's just beyond the top of the down, fires the swivel guns from Baker's Hill, then from the alcove sounds a third salvo from the hermitage to the satisfaction of all. The repercussions and echoes delighted the hearers, reports Mr. Gilbert White, not only filling the life with a roar, but as if all the beeches were tearing up by the roots. But turning to the left, they pervaded the vale above Combwood ponds, and after a pause seemed to take up the clash again, to extend round Hartley hangers, and to die away at last among the coppices and coverts of Wardleham. The kin of this house revel in noise as much as they revel in quiet. Great 5 November with Roman candles, serpents and skyrockets, the memory of that ancient unacquitted betrayal, popish treachery, sheep anointed to the slaughter, glee of the entire street, detonations, sudden flares and hissings, horses stare, trot round the paddocks in their most significant manner, dogs lay low, Fifield cries most mournfully, nothing now frights me in the way of noise, constant alarums, greenfinch in the polyants, blackbird in the cherry tree, papist in the cellar all those years ago, and the whole of Selborne slumbers under the stars, all but the creatures that nest below ground or in the cavities of rocks and trees. Sheep lie abroad around the village by night, so do cattle, and in summer horses. Hogs doze among beech roots, in the autumn thickets, hollows sculpted to fit their bodies. These creatures, domestic as humans, lie out every night in the darkness, no less composure than during the day. Night is home to them too. A soft thatch of clouds pulled apart by the breeze. Old woman living at the foot of the hanger, she curls up in the hedge below. By an ash within sight of the common gypsy girl under a blanket, giving birth in a September deluge, circumstances too trying for a cow, the curate notes. Boy dozes beside his dog while watching flocks on the sheepdown. Impoverished wanderer sleeps against reek of cow grass, fleeing his own parish, barely sleeps, hoping to wake before the farmer does, who rises well before first light. Even in summer I withdraw by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, only a seeming withdrawal, rouse again and again throughout the night, after 40 years in a red brick box, My waking is not as wary as it once was. This garden, too, is unnaturally safe. I try to keep the old ways that all creatures keep. One eye open, skin lightening, so listening, not in fear but attention. Curlew clamors in the dark. Night moth agitates in the air above me. Sky predation of village cats. Dogs come to eat gooseberries right for the hedge. Piping note of young fern owls in the distance, chattering of their elders, like noise of a laser glender's wheel on the street, chirping of the grasshopper lark, wood owls hooting from the walnut tree overhead, singing of woodlarks, chirring of mole crickets, stirring of cattle in the grass, bat flutter low along the fruit wall, lonely pace of a traveler's horse making its way down Selburne toward the compasses in the dark, sounds of dreaming as the humans of this village toss in their beds. I attend to the shadows, to the night shapes of the trees surrounding this garden, thatched bulk of houses down the village back. I cannot hear everything the foxes hear, or smell everything the dogs smell, or fear everything the humans fear, but I can sense the remote static of the aurora borealis, stretching east to west across the welkin, feel the stars overhead when the wind drops, resonant in their silence, smell the dawn when it is still just a premonition, a stirring in the throat of the earliest songbird, the wakeful rooster. Never has Mr. Gilbert White slept in the night out of doors. Even under a tent of the great bed, even on the finest of midsummer eves, he always chooses to sleep within. A plaster ceiling timbers tiles over his dreams. Meanwhile, the white thorn near the ash house grows on moonshiny nights, willow blossom. Author of the Great Methodist, Mr. John Ray asks, why should there be implanted in each sex such a vehement and inexpugnable appetite of copulation? Mr. John Ray's wife knew full well why. Locked in a despairing embrace, wishing her husband could wait with such a question, the earth would soon empty without such vehement, expugnable promptings. A stirring gratification for thinking ahead, even when one is not thinking ahead at all. The rub and thump of mating rouses the parish in spring. Restless pairings, quick conjugations, overspill of seed, coop, stable, sty, and fold. The fevered opportunity of every encounter, tup and ewes in the neighboring fields at it. Treading of birds in the nest, in the trees, on the ground, in the garden and sky, adhesion of frogs, earthworms laid end to end, hermaphroditic. Mr. Gilbert White listens with maiden ears, Miss John White with the ears of a bride, she from a broken pairing, he like me unpaired. To his nephew, Mr. Samuel Barker, the curate writes, you are not the only person that finds himself under difficulties respecting the sexuality of mosses, sends along edifying illustrations. In the plate respecting the male and female balasnaria, he observes, you will see a wonderful instance of the wisdom of Providence. Other creatures have wonderful instances, too, no less mysterious than those of the mosses. Consider the eel, consider the reptiles. There is a degree of dubiousness and obscurity, Mr. Gilbert White notes, attending the propagation of this class of animals, though to a reptile it is plain as day. No more obscure than the propagation of humans, vastly less dubious, since the question of costume, getting into or out of a timely fashion, never arises. None of the passion for privacy, no pretense of fidelity beyond the emotion's fidelity of copulation, never the readiness of shame or guilt that humans display over the nature of the act itself. Virtuosos of despair and justification, no need to credit the wisdom of Providence, wisdom of plenty in the flesh, wisdom in its season. Birds set aside what the curate calls a soft passion in winter. Worms defer to the frost. Every being reserves a part of the year for propagating, all but humans, conceiving and whelping in every week of the calendar, in and out of wedlock, in and out of doors, in ash house, barn, and bedchamber, wherever the fancy takes them. Reason, Mr. Gilbert White writes, would often vary and do that by many methods which instinct effects by one alone. True in the matter of mating, too, a behavior unfettered in humans, the intercourse of reasonable beings, simplicity of instinct embroidered by lust, variations, etudes, improvisations. I suspect that humans of breeding age can copulate from almost any direction, an agility matched only by their haste. Rush to coitus, and end to coitus. Curious in creatures so endowed with time, the naturalist marks the composure of tortoises. An animal, Mr. Gilbert White notes, said to be a whole month in performing 1 feat of copulation, proportioning one's industry to one's pleasures, feat only in humanoids. Dubious and obscure the propagation of humans, witness Goody Hammond. This is the person that Thomas says he likes as well as a man, Mr. Gilbert White, to Molly White, and indeed, accepting that she wears petticoats and now and then has a child, you would think her a man. Accepting indeed, and except wings, beaks, and a pair of bandy legs, I am a kingfisher. Thomas likes Goody Hammond for her self-absorbing labors, not for what she does or doesn't resemble bare-armed Amazon with a hedge-hook for a bow. Fashionable woman visiting from London to Lord Stawell at Alice Holt, strolling the village, arm in arm. touring this garden, nothing ambiguous in their makings. Sexual compasses flaunted with clothing, a separate species from Goody Hammond, separate even from Miss John White, flounced and bedizened with most woefully overheaded. Ostrich plumes ride up and down on their heads as they walk. Curious virility in dress, ingenious contrivance. How do their males come at them? And at what cost? Mr. Gilbert White takes the rut for granted in others, never confesses to the appetite in himself, pushed copulation to the side of his plate as a young man, restrained by his college, his calling, penalties laid upon the Oxford man who weds, loss of fellowship, withdrawn from the fray that surrounds him, decorum of his station in life, though it hardly deters others in his garb, economy stronger than the sex within him, considerable expenses of the household, excreting the great parlor, cost of the garden, blacksmith's bills, 600 building bricks, 20 bushels of gay lime. Price of a neat post-chaise hired from Mr. Harrow, 6 shillings 3 from Selborne to Alton every trip, and back again. Purchase of adjoining gardens, strips of land in the fields behind the house. Calendar year of butcher's meat, straw and oats, matter of £34 and some shillings 1 year, £47 another, I'd say received in full by me. John Hale and signed for year after year. Mr. Richard Knight's malt. Farmer Hale's malt. Suit of clothes in Bunce and Taylor, Farmer Berryman for ploughing the Yule close. Carriage of a hogshead and port wine from Southampton, and those 24 blue plates and egg cups. The 18 London ivory-handled knives and forks from Addie Bellamy, facing Grocer's Alley in the Poultry, impediments many, incentives few, 60 nieces and nephews, plenty of young people, and now in the household Miss John White, sister, companion, friend. All the family a man could desire, more than enough intercourse in the purview of St. Mary's, licit and otherwise, no need to add his mite. In spring the parish swims in the airborne milk of its vegetation, clouds of male yew farina on the drift. St. Mary's, accidental abundance of male yews in the churchyards, the curate notes. Since men, when they first planted yews, little dreamed that there were sexes in trees, less concupiscent trees in the churchyards, had they known, less apt to dush parishioners and pollen. In the hop grounds farmers cultivate the female hops, males rooted out whenever they appear, as if the vines were cattle and only the cows were wanted, but something is lacking without the male. Male plants will not bear good hops, Mr. Gilbert White observes. After much thought he wonders, but may not some of their farina be necessary towards rendering the female productions more perfect? That question he puts to his neighbors. The female productions improve. Hops all across the parish, hedged and gardened over the south of England, a canopy of vines on the chestnut poles, bitter cones, picked and dried and bagged, hot kilns, kindled after the picking, effluvial perfume of fading summer, bags and wagon loads to Weyhill Fair. The wonder is not that humans manage to propagate the crop. The wonder is they manage to propagate themselves. A neighboring cleric believes that a bachelor is unable to recognize swallows. Little noted advantage of the wedded state, so incomplete, so traditional is the notion of sexual system. Was there a time when humans put males to death because they bore no children? How have they kept from caponizing each other? But instinct teaches what reason learns too late, even among humans. At least in this most instinctive of matters, sap rises, dew gathers, in the promiscuity of nature each finds its own. The sportsman knows cock pheasant, and the instant it flushes, hunter kens the dog fox on open ground, poacher feels the rough swelling of the trout in Dorton stream. The leisurely Miss John Mulso tells the bull from the milk cow by the hump on his shoulder. No need for inspect the apparatus. She knows the hen by its petticoat, not by the lack of comb or crow alone. The good farmer is quick with the knife, wethers and oxen, not rams and bulls, only enough seed to go around as wanted. One cock too many balls the hens. Peace in the barnyard. Castration has a strange effect, Mr. Gilbert White notes, shrinking the gulf between the sexes. The gelding, the barrow, the capon, the spade sow, cut by the man who makes that his trade. So the world is ordered, old Noah's method, 2 by 2, male and female, and the barnyard sex in between. But Mr. Gilbert White, the naturalist, sexes every creature. Mr. and Miss Flea, mole cricket and his courtesan, harems of the avian tribe, the harvest mouse at nurse, male and female, youth from adult, mating from non-mating, species from species, peering at the particulars, the nest, the song, the sex dance, the inevitable union. He chooses his time mid-April. He watches closely the short-winged summer birds before the beeches open, before the white-thorn sedges thicken with blossom, the characteristic manner of every bird, swagger of crows and dolls afoot, bank martins wriggling, desultory flight, the languishing, faltering greenfinch in love. Only those who conceal their amorous intrigues deceive the curate, who do not court on the ground like rooks, or shriek in juncture on the wing like swifts. or certify before the altar at least some of their copulations like humans. Mr. Gilbert White sexes everything except the months and seasons themselves, everything but the weather and the ingredients of the landscape. And of those, he says, I think there is somewhat peculiarly sweet and amusing in the shapely figured aspect of chalk hills, in preference to those of stone, which are rugged, broken, abrupt, and shapeless. Spring runs ahead of itself into the heat of late May. Selborne Fair convenes, a cattle mart. The plestor crowded with bawling and lowing, bellowing of humans drunk on housekeeper's beer, brewed specifically for the fair, reaching to where I lie in the beans and sainfoin, hidden without hiding. Great storm of June comes on, sulphurous blue mist along the sloping woods, rushing and roaring of hail. Then, at last, a settled month, pleasant breezes, fine gleams, red evenings, golden weather, high summer of that annus mirabilis, the human year 1784. Mr. Charles Eddy returns from the seas, trim young man, suitable size for the shipboard life, dwarfed by Molly White like his mother, Miss Andrew Eddy. First visit to Selborne since the death of his father, the vicar, in the backward spring of the year. Delirious fever and blains. Snow thick upon the village in April, deep as horse's belly along the hedges. Poor tax doubled. As late as I've ever risen here, the Reverend Andrew Eddy, B.D., already laid to earth. Conjugal, parental, sacerdotal virtues combined, a preacher of righteousness, and his vicarage chimney, Mr. Gilbert White's flitch of bacon often hung to dry. Voyage of the Duke of Kingston. Mr. Charles Eddy's ship burnt by accident off Ceylon. Mr. Charles Eddy takes passage aboard the man-of-war Exeter. Madagascar, Isle of Ascension, ship so crazed that it was broken up and burned at the Cape of Good Hope. Young man at last embarks for London aboard the transport Content. His cargo, hummingbirds shot at Cape, ostrich eggs, turtle eggs, spinal shells, a curious cudweed from a Dutchman's garden, the pinnacle of sailor Small's virtue. 2 finely checked tortoises lie from Madagascar, prizes obtained with the thought of Mr. Gilbert White in mind. Mr. Gilbert White and his Timothy. Eggs carefully repacked in London, seashells too, obviously fragile, but the tortoises are stowed in the empty boot of the Kensington coach. Deeply inertial creatures we tortoises are, used to the steady gradations of our own locomotion, mild acceleration, step-by-step measure of uneven terrain. The rise and fall of a ship's progress is unpleasant. Still worse the way I was basketed to Ringmer, penny-aired beside a servant's hip, earthed and boxed for violet ride to Selborne by post-chaise, but to be set loose in a wooden coach boot, and driven south along the coach road to Alton, brisk and well in the morning after thousands of miles by sea, then a purgatory of jolts and poundings over the dismal track to Selborne, dashed again and again from top to bottom, side to side, a thunder of one's own, a hailstorm of self, din of destruction minute after minute, hour after hour, mile after mile. Male tortoise mortally wounded. Who knows at what point in that fatal route, jumbled to death, killed by his own momentum, churned out of life, though it did not finally perish until that night, shell and damaged, but the fragility of the flesh within it demonstrated beyond a doubt the very reason for that armor. In the morning sun, Mr. Charles Eddy and Mr. Gilbert White placed the female tortoise upon the glass plot, Mr. John White at their side, garden shears in hand. Thomas finds me among the poppies and sets me beside the stranger, as witness, counselor, token of benign intent. Her gibbous dome rises in as abruptly as the hanger, as convex, as yellow as the hunter's moon half-horizoned in early October, finally checkered, tiled in alternate triangles, the color of a ram's horn, soberly toothed along the lower edges of her carapace, bright bony palates, discontinuously curved, scutes sutured as if each were a more ingenious solution to the same problem. Head and neck and legs no less vivid, no less amber than her shell. Sunlight embraces her and everyone around her. A very grand personage, Mr. Gilbert White says, stooping in admiration. Very grand, says the young sailor, who has seen her far grander where she naturally belongs. I stand beside her, nearly of a size, though her shell rises like a haystack above me, not kin, not even kind, yet near enough in nature to know that she is on the point of death. Pupils as dark as mine, as reflective as pooling. I cannot say that she sees me. Already looking far within, a bright film comes over her eye, a fall of cobwebs against the sun. Legs arch and tense, and in the grass behind her she posits a single egg, then dies, sinking to rest on her tiled underbelly. It is a curious moment. Shell still glistens in the frolicking sun. Dome swells as high as it diges, then legs propped up by the perches she took on the turf have not yet relaxed. Only her head and tail have fallen, beak slightly open, crusted like the shore of an algal pond. Something, it seems, has passed from her to the egg, but the egg lies inanimate, the limbo of her breed, on that African island far away. It might have hatched some months from now, if it had survived predation to the rest. Here it can only spoil, misguided by the aberrations of this climate. Mr. Gilbert White picks up the egg. Mr. Charles Eddy gathers the tortoise. Miss John White walks forward the shrubbery on Baker's Hill, Thomas after her, to his stone garden stroller. I am left to make my way back to the poppies, having seen what I could not help seeing. Just another small corpse, 10¼ pounds than weight. What makes her different isn't her beauty or her scarcity or the distance she traveled in order to die here. It is this. The humans meant her to live. Mr. Gilbert White, better than anyone, could guess what a probable surfeit of life lay before her. A more than human expanse of days, how that changes the calculation, how her death differs from that of the green woodpecker laughing at all the world, but expecting to see only one more summer. Mr. Gilbert White is unable to say, never having put the question to himself in so many words. At his work table he clears the contents of her body, any faint regret undone by the habit of the knife. The disassembly of such an interesting creature finds 30 eggs waiting, cleans the carapace in water tub, dries it carefully, daubs the interior with one of the preserving concoctions, and sets it on a shelf to dry. Then tea. What will become of her shell? For a time it will stand for the whole tortoise, that lustrous being in the memory of those who saw her living, in a Madagascar clearing, on a sunny Hampshire grass plot in the north of July in the very last moments of her life. The shell will become, for Mr. Charles Eddy at least, the memento of a grand youthful voyage, utterly contrary to the quiet, unventuresome spirit of his father, Mr. Andrew Eddy, who used to say that he would not cross Selborne Common at night for 50 pounds. Then the shell becomes a curio, an uncommon object of unusual beauty or interest, separate from the identity of the creature who grew it and wore it, testimony to a type, not an individual, to something more general even than type. Perhaps it enters one of the grand apothecary shops that humans call museums, exhibited to the curious at half a guinea a head. More likely it merely takes on a dust of years. Demoted to a hallway table, the sort where Miss Rebecca Snook's curiously hinged tortoiseshells lay. And what became of them once the good old lady died? One day, maid or grandchild brushes against it, dashes it to the floor, the shell cracks dried by time, some earnest soul putties it together, and then decades hence, an entirely separate longevity, it comes apart for good. (109) Undimmed glow of her carapace in the sunshine, pallor of that egg, so long hidden, carried from Madagascar to this Hampshire garden, no knowing what brought it out of her at last, whether it was a right to be laid at any cost, whether a clasping in her bowels drove it from her, where she believed herself to be, if believed she had died. But in dying her sex became manifest, not by comparison to the male of the species, not by form or color or size of the parts of generation, plain proof of the egg behind her in the grass, testament round and white and much resembling in size and shape the egg of an owl. Witnesses besides Mr. Gilbert White, a pure if accidental accession of knowledge, evidence absolute as rare as it is complete. My own case is far less unequivocal. Nest-making devoted to personal hibernation, no eggs buried under the monk's rhubarb or hidden at the foot of the muscadine vine. None laid on the grass plot, no preening, no dalliance, no seasons of the kind the mares enjoy, heat of the dogs, fervor of the gilts, coming into their own, none of the endless head-bobbing suggestions the ducks fling after drakes. Who would there be to fling mine upon? And so Mr. Gilbert White has always supposed that I am male, perfectly able to sex a swallow. The curate is, even though celibate, as alert to the sex of swallows as swallows themselves, at roost, on the wing, in the nest, scouting over the hangar, taking flies off the sides of the church tower, skimming over a newly penned fallow. But when he writes about swallows, Mr. Gilbert White worries at sex to say they have, despite the fact. I had used the pronoun personal feminine to my swallows, he tells Miss Gibraltar, brother, now dead, but somebody objected, so I put it in its place. But I think you are right, and shall replace she and her, though there is objection that in a pair a male is implied, as well as a female, and yet he would sound awkward for a bird. Small wonder, then, that he has mistaken my sex. Perhaps she would sound awkward for a tortoise, for the Timothy that Mr. Henry Snook bestowed upon me so long ago in Chichester. A foolish assumption, a giving in to alliteration. Perhaps Mr. Gilbert White is also misled by the extravagance of my adventures. Perhaps a sympathetic assumption of companionship between us. Timothy, I have been this half-century and more. Timothy, I shall be forever after, thanks to Mr. Gilbert White's scribbling. And yet not wholly, never wholly, Timothy. Mr. Gilbert White will clear the contents of my body if I die first. He will go as surely to his grave, intact, sundered, shell drying on a shelf against the wall, but can he read the arrangement of my internal organs? I am not one of his birds or small mammals, whose innards he knows like the parish horse paths. He will not find the egg road he finds inside the viper. No train of eggs, even the germs of eggs, waiting patiently to give my secret away. None of the signs of the female, none that a curate would notice, flare in the rounding of my carapace, means nothing to him. But female I am, and have always been, since the moment in the egg, decades ago. Female I was in that ancient country. This climate, this England, has neutered me. Winter of the human year 1740, my first at Rebecca Snook's. It came entirely unexpected, a stronger prompting to dig than I had ever known, calling for a haste I did not have. Half buried in that mired bed was as deep as I got, half known before half buried. Mud congealing around me, shell bare to the winds tumbling over the courtyard wall, not the warm, dry northerlies of home, damp howling fresh in the Arctic, frost thrust deep into the ground, soil heaved and buckled, stone cast up onto the furrow, tortoise upon to the clod. No rousing to find a warmer bed, a sounder roost, a deadly torpor instead, as though my blood had drained away and frozen beneath me. No rest, and its sleep, if sleep it was a bare clinging to life. When I rose again at last, even the humans seemed dazed by what they had suffered. The hunger of spring, hungriest of seasons, seemed painfully welcome to them. There have been winters more bitter by far, 1757 and 1768, 1776 and 1784. Country in tatters after each of them, humans and sheep with the same raw look in their eyes, the survivors well into March, but even in mild winters, mild for this England, I lie dormant far too long. Week after week, month after month, vastly beyond the pounds set for my nature. December in Selborne, my first, summer-like weather. Insects in air, moss placed carefully over my back, where Thomas where I lie. Light, mellow soil, well drained, warm border under fruit wall. Bees still at play before their hives, ameliorating influence of the hanger, and yet outruns the tide of sleep for months on end. Even this past winter, still stirring on December under a tuft of long grass, flies droning overhead, toadflax blooming, hair nestled under a cabbage waiting to nibble the pinks. Dry spell as the old year ends, barely a freeze at all in the dew. Yet instead of a brief coasting voyage under fair skies, land in sight, balmy current, I plunge for the mid-ocean deeps. No turning back, no catching myself on the drift. Untoward plummet to the bottom. Only the natural buoyancy of life itself carries me back to the surface year after year. Mr. Gilbert White comes direct from the potato bed to stare down at me with Thomas. Bees on the crocuses, red start in the highwood, song of the walk-mowing people, unlimited sky overhead, irrelevant marks of human towering high above me. Timotheus and his lyre once again sing-song words, like warm spring rain on my back. How welcome the confusion of voices in my ear. To and fro of this climate, it was unsprung my vitals, stalls me for months on end. Some internal weather has gone awry, carried to the thin edge of life every winter, everything at cross purposes in my hibernaculum. Waves running out from shore, breaking far away in mid-ocean, rain falling upward, sun showing itself in phases like the moon's, crescent, gibbous, and the new sun worst of all, rising dark in the dark sky just as the far corner of my winter's orbit, as I finally turn toward spring once more. At last I return alone here to this garden, no longer a nest of unlaid eggs, a settlement inside me. What year I came back empty I cannot say, but I am an abundant city. Inhabitants stolen, plagued, driven off, murdered, gone up into the hills to perform some ancient rite, to bribe some failed fertility. Hecatombs of oil, if effective, if hecatombs and oil where there were. Never to come back again, as if they forgot to pull of home they once left it, call of those tombs, ease of those baths, lintels, gods, fresh water from a spring, sea at their feet, pines at their shoulders. That demise caused me no suffering, no particular sadness about the possibilities withered within me. I lost none of my mentality. In Sicilia I would have laid those eggs in a scrape in the ground, and wandered off. Duty accomplished, generation served, as Mr. Gilbert White would say. Nothing further to be done. Any of those clutches prey to a raven or weasel, broken up, broken apart. The predator here is stealthier far. 15 degrees of northern latitude, all my eggs at once. Had I laid them year by year in the Sicilian scrub, I would never have known how many of my progeny lived. Now I do know. That is the difference. I feel merely the discordance of it all. One less hunger. The time of the male tortoise comes. No urge to seek him out. I lack the impulse as much as I lack the male himself. As though the swallows were to rise on the wing of September, and thinking better of it, settle back onto their roosts and winter here. If the great bed were crowded with males of my kind, clamoring at the foot of the ha-ha, hissing at each other, necks outstretched, I would still miss the yearning. The superfluity I need to seek him out has been taken from me, little by little. Every winter I have spent in this savage Atlantic weather. I no longer have wants to imitate, unlike the rest of females in Selborne. Only enough life left for myself. Little enough of that. The ewe requires the ram and makes it known. The female dog fox, yipping and summons her mate. The famous Selborne sow, sagacious and artful, walks a distant farm when the time is upon her, opening gates as she does, letting herself into the boar's pen, several days conversing, then she excuses herself and homeward again. So abhorrent is celibacy to the sex. Who knows what the village women say to their men? How does Nanny Hale urge her farmer a year or two after the wedding? And what they may do in the night, I cannot say. Mr. Gilbert White observes that a snake's lost its skin like a stocking or a woman's glove, turned wrong side outward, intricately involves its length among the grasses in a mid-September field, then unsheaths itself. The reptile changes its coat, the curate's homely metaphor. Thus it appears, he writes, snakes crawl out of the mouth of their own sloughs and quit the tail part last, just as eels are skinned by a cookmaid. Divine service at St. Mary's, graveyard all about, trunk of a mighty yew, Selborne Street down the slope through the Plestor, Dorton down the other way, toward Oakhanger Stream, and the lane beyond Peascod House. Abrupt, uneven country, Mr. Gilbert White calls his parish, full of hills and woods, and therefore full of birds. Church of England, no papists, no Protestant dissenters, therefore full of parishioners, gathering on the mild mount where St. Mary's stands. They all hope to change their coats in the grass of that graveyard, throw their enamelled skins, as the poet says, rise new-sighted from death some day, so they say at morning and evening prayers, on feast days and Sundays, an earnest appeal to their God, all-perfect donor, article of faith, strong among them, awaiting the new raiment of new life, after being skinned by the cook-made death. From his seat in heaven, God the naturalist contemplates that difficult transition, tender predicament of the new sloughed Christian, so similar to the molting snake. Scales from its very eyes peel off in the mold like spectacles, Mr. Gilbert White's words. While the scales of the eyes are growing loose, a new skin of force-ring. The creature in appearance must be blind and feel itself in an awkward, uneasy situation. The condition of their faith, awkward, uneasy, blind, hope in the fear of what lies beyond the grave, fear uppermost of their lives. In his study, Mr. Gilbert White examines the serpent's skin, a ghostliness about it. Reflection left in the mirror, isinglass remnant. He peers through the discarded scales of the snake's eyes, right side outward as the reptile used them, discovers that those lenses lessen objects much, when compounded by the lens of the human eye, that is, one animal gazing through the eye of another. The thought does not present itself in that form to Mr. Gilbert White, who, like the rest of his breed, rarely considers himself an animal. It would be a most entertaining sight, he writes, could a person be an eyewitness to such a feat and see the snake in the act of changing his garment. A better sight yet to see the change the parishioners and their curate pray for, naturalists in the field, watching closely, reasonable chance of observing a snake in its molt, parting from itself, extruding a new serpent, reasonable chance of coming upon the snake's discarded skin, and then some distance off the snake itself, scales newly gilded, with it writhing away, but there is no coming upon the new man, the new woman, no coming upon the shuck of these praying beasts, that old surrendered flesh, no catching them as they substantiate. They bury all they have to leave behind, all they have to carry forward. Wheat that was lodged rises again, not the dead, buried they remain, turf thick over the coffins in St. Mary's Cemetery, graves still sealed on an Easter morning with a high rumbling wind. In the equinoctial blasts of autumn, in the amazing tempest of 1703 which felled the great oak and cluster, stone steps around it, seats above, the delight of old and young, the elders report, a place of much resort in summer evenings, where the former sat in the grave debate, while the latter frolicked and danced before them. Mr. Gilbert White has buried them all in his life, old, young, former, latter, the grave and the frolicking, more than 400 interred in his time. By the graveside again and again reads the words, with whom do live the spirits of them, intones the prayers, marks the grief, but can't help noticing how deep the January frost has entered the ground, can't help thinking of Timothy under the walnut leaves, soil bound by a foot in winter. Is death so fearsome that it must be undone? Is this life so poor a thing? Is not eternity somewhat too long? Theirs is a niggardly faith, withal. Parishioners believe only as much as will save the humans among them. Never mind the rest of creation, unwillingly to distinguish the dead from the living, but eagerly to set apart the rest of creation. 11th Sunday after Trinity, mid-August, Michaelmas, daisies in bloom, sun, shower, gleam, clouds, 63 degrees, suppressed air of festival. St. Mary's hung with faded garlands in honor of village girls reputed to have died virgins, white paper gloves and knots and roses. Reputed is Mr. Gilbert White's word, man of evidence as well as faith. He rises to the pulpit. God's family, he says, is numberless, comprehending the whole race of mankind and only the race of mankind, thereby cutting off most of creation. But numberless is not the race of mankind. Numberless is the race of beetles. Numberless are the most insignificant insects and reptiles, flying ants that swarm by millions in this garden, armies of aphids falling in showers over the village, palmer wormers hanging by threads from the yolks, shoals of shell snails, the earthworms, mighty Mr. Gilbert White avers, and their effect on the economy of nature, yet excluded from the family of God. Humans believe that the parish of earth exists solely for their use, fabric of cottages, roofs, sheds, and shops, shelter of brew houses, malt houses, ash houses, granaries, kilns, handwork in brick and wood, slate, stone, and thatch, green sand, blue rag, wattle, walks and alleys and side yards through this village, the comfort of the human establishment, chambers and hearths as welcoming as a human face, houses looking out on the street, and hangar with great staring human eyes, but martins brood among the eaves in the street, as if eaves had been hung for them, coal mice in the overhang of a thatched house as if thatched for them, dolls in the oaken church, shingles, as though shingled for no other purpose, owls hiss and screech like goblins in the tower high above the churchyard, their right to tower as absolute as the vicar's. They flutter at the windows of the dying, alarming the weak-minded, the more than usually unsuperstitious. Swallows dash up and down the village street and over the garden walks, redbreasts fly into houses and soil the furniture with elderberry droppings. Crickets ring on the moist kitchen hearth, singing against rain. Harvest bugs bite the ladies in ways and places their spouses never do. Fleets and mites lodge in the skin and hair and feathers of every creature, no matter how reasonable. Flies in the dining room, bats under the chimney leads. As morning rises, a living to be eked out in every corner, no matter how tiny, shelter in every crevice. Village alive with creation, humans vastly outnumbered. Nearly 700 humans in the parish, many thousands of blattes swarming in just one of the neighboring houses, males through the casements of open windows on a hot summer night. Yet from the pulpit humans and animals form separate parishes, one in spiritual communion with the Creator, the other herds and flocks and swarms and tribes and troops, the parish of the merely created. The louse under the shirt of a Sunday parishioner leaves St. Mary's unblessed, no matter how its host prays. Eyes screwed shut, hands folded, beseeching hard, a next life pleased with no biting and sucking insects. Mr. Gilbert White in the pulpit to the worshipfuls of Selborne. God, he says, has set up a light in the breast of every particular of human nature, a common badge called reason, faculty distinguishing man from beasts. The principle of all knowledge, he calls it, the very how of going and knowing of God. More custom than reason in the liturgy, more hope than knowledge. No surfeit of reason in Selborne either. Custom a vastly stronger force in the village, habit of their lives, smoother path, doing as their fathers and mothers did, believing as they believed, building as they built, seeing exactly what they expect to see, and very little else, reverting to fear when they don't, superstition sucked in with miller's milk, tide of credulous faith always on the flood. Set loose in this garden, I stride down the long walk, spring 8th, 1780, back and forth along the ha-ha, the mere brick breastwork. My discernment puzzles Mr. Gilbert White. He notes with surprise what he calls my powers of instinct. Timothy the tortoise, he writes, is much too wise to walk into a well, for when he arrives at the ha-ha he distinguishes the fall of the ground, and retires with caution, or marches carefully along the edge. Mr. Gilbert White knows nothing of my ancient city. Its cisterns and baths, rubble walls and necropolis cannot imagine me on a cornice overlooking the sea, dozing on a sun-baked precipice. I know something of steep places, something of the drop. The fall of the ground is plain to see. Even Mr. John Ray, the naturalist's great antecedent, discovers more than bare instinct in the land tortoise, behavior that argues something of reason in the reptile. He notes that a tortoise struggles to right itself, when overturned, by using the lay of the land. Their industry upon this account, he says the sagacious author, is very admirable. Wisdom of God in the works of creation, if you like. Place a human at the risk of death. Admire his industry in trying to escape it. Call it what you will, reason, instinct, superstition, and faith. But does Rover tumble off the edge of the ha-ha? Does Gunnery, the old bantam hen? The force of instinct provokes Mr. Gilbert White, purity of intention in the animal kind. confidence of behavior, diversity of birds' nests, beauty of their design, preciseness of their situations. He admires the sagacity of the willow wren, who hides her brood with moss, nest ball of the harvest mouse, cradle suspended in the head of a thistle, elegant instance of the efforts of instinct. The urge among cattle to stand in ponds when summer overheats, belly deep, mid-leg, as nature glides them, an undistinguishing, limited faculty. Mr. Gilbert White calls instinct. Sometimes above reason, he argues, other times far below it. That secret influence by which every species is impelled naturally to pursue at all times the same way or track without any teaching or example. This confining the brute creation to the cartways of love and hunger. He shafts Mr. Ralph Churton for his vagaries, his uncertainty planning the Christmas visit to Selborne. Pray come on the 24th, Mr. Gilbert White instructs, for if you cannot be as regular as your migrations as a ring-goselle or a swallow, what is the use of all your knowledge, since it may be outdone by instinct? Wheat harvest in the fields around the village, binding in small sheaves, ricking and gleaning. Bulls begin their shrill autumnal note. August the silent month for birdsong, except for the goldfinch. Mr. Gilbert White to his parishioners. Reason, he says, resembles a celestial flame. It sparkles and shines and spreads out its luster in every way and extends itself to all parts of the universe. And attracts to it not only present but also past and future objects, those in heaven above and in the earth beneath and even under it. Yet reason lacks certainty here in the thicket of ordinary life, none of the immediacy of instinct, incontrovertible urging a martin feels in building her nest, unfailing return of the swifts. Reason may sparkle and shine to all parts of the universe, but it is a guttering candle to humans here in the dark, light of a glowworm when smoke lies low over the fields. Humans choose against reason, and the better reason of instinct every day. Caught in their will I, shall I, which leg to put forth first. Tottering, still-gated, beside plight, reason too often a will-o'-the-wisp, instinct a relic within them. The naturalist learns in time to seek wisdom wherever wisdom can be found, in the fern owl, in the great bat of evening, in every species. Conviction growing upon Mr. Gilbert White as he ages, sense of wonder rising within him, not at the beauty of nature alone, but at what it knows. Short-winged summer birds, delicate beings, how, he wonders, do they bear up against such storms of snow and rain and make their way through such meteorous turbulencies as one should suppose would embarrass and retard the most hardy, resolute of the winged nation? Yet they keep their appointed times and seasons in spite of frosts and winds, return to their stations periodically as if they had met with nothing to obstruct them. Can a bird be called foolish, he asks, which knows the times and seasons and conducts its migrations over seas and continents with such accuracy and success? Can it be called foolish when it is ready to repel intruders and by menaces to defend to the best of its power its callow and helpless young? Mr. Gilbert White could preach a sermon upon the constancy of the swift, unvarying cycle of its year. 8 or 9 pair arrive in Selborne by the end of April, and retreat from it punctually by mid-August, 11th Sunday after Trinity, as true to their time as the solstice or the arrival of Findon, the Farringdon carrier. They build under low thatched roofs along the street, dash and frolic through Selborne, around St. Mary's, above the Glebe Close, and back again, pursuing church owls and hawks, squeaking on wing until a quarter before 9 in midsummer. Dear to Mr. Gilbert White above all other birds, the swifts, through defective architecture, fledgling falls from the nest into the churchyard. Curate feeds it with flies, tosses it back up onto the shingles. He studies the swifts with great penetration, observes their behavior in every weather, how they mate in air, how their wings meet over their backs when they do so, how in Selborne they build under the lowest and meanest cottages as well as on the Tower of St. Mary's. Theirs is an earthly ascension, making no distinction between rich and poor. Mr. Gilbert White instructs his nieces and nephews in the swift-like virtues, punctuality, mildness, parental and spousal domesticity, also the delight in existence. He is possessed by their wonderful powers of wing, habit of feeding in the highest precincts of sky. The way thunderous weather stirs them. Mr. Gilbert White stands in the melon ground on Baker's Hill, hat removed, head thrown back, hearing little enough now, eyesight dimming, but gazing at swifts almost out of sight in the skies above the Ewell Close for half an hour on end. They live, he says, more in air than any other bird. They perform all functions there save those of sleeping and incubation. Are there to be no swifts in the skies of Mr. Gilbert White's heaven? No house martins building under the thatched eaves of that celestial city? No tortoises in the gardens there? And what if instinct, so little known to humans, but a pure flame in the swifts, is a surer guide than reason to his God? And what if this earth is that heaven, no God in residence, no God needed, every instant of this one lone life, the God itself? Mr. Gilbert White could turn a sermon upon the swifts, but he keeps his divinity and his natural history apart, separate parishes after all. The sermon he does make, a brief one, is upon the loon, the great northern diver, rare visitor to the Hampshire. Found alive and on the Hayth, alive at the time, 3 dams short of 3 pounds, wingspan 42 inches, rancid and inedible flesh, but so incomparably adapted to its mode of life, writes Mr. Gilbert White, that in no instance do we see the wisdom of God in the creation to more advantage. Head proportioned to pierce the waves, foot for swimming and diving, wings mounted forward to propel the bird under water, and yet the loon is excluded from the greater hope of humans, attest to the wisdom of God in the creation, but not a member of his family, only a marker, a lump of bright chalk showing the way across Selborne Common, the sheep walk in the dark of night. One earthly parish, this only life. Nature is such an economist, Mr. Gilbert White writes, that the most incongruous animals can avail themselves of each other. Wagtails, he means, picking flies from the legs of cattle grazing in moist, low pastures. But are wagtails and cattle more incongruous than the cow and the girl who milks her? Than the cow and the girl and the harvest bug that bites her? Intermingled altogether with the economy of nature. Humans repose in the distinctness of their being, family of God, upright stature, bipedal stride, pride of reason, Pompeian head. They hold themselves apart from the works of the creation as much as they can, except for sporting and poaching, breeding and rearing of barnyard animals, coaxing wheat and barley and turnips out of the ground, nothing quite real until they see its reflection. They mirror the out-of-doors in their mind, hold it up to the glass as a way of holding it apart, framing it, giving it perspective, keeping the world at a murmurous rook distance. The hanging beech woods, Mr. Gilbert White writes, begin to beautifully tinged and to afford the most lovely scrapes. Very engaging to the eye and imagination, they afford sweet lights and shades. Maples are also finely tinged, These scenes are worthy the pencil of a Rubens. Every accoutrement divides them in their own minds from the kingdom of other creatures, every practice, every artifice. Pencil of Rubens, use of Florence oil, pepper, spinning of wool, art of tea, shaving, pounds and shillings and pence, bills of exchange, news from abroad, London, hymns of the prayerful, songs of the drunken body, Tompion clock, guinea subscription for the sick and lame in the county hospital, silver spurs, pinchbeck seal, separate in the curious act of reading, eyes fixed to the page like a stoat staring down a field mouse, attention averted from everything else, nosing along the trail of words. Mr. Ralph Churton strides across the glass plot. Sheep bells, calf bawling, reel of bird song, deaf to it all. Duodecimo held head high. Again through judicious Virgil, that notorious poacher from the Greek, mumbling in time to something other than his footsteps. How does he avoid the ha-ha? Dressing and undressing, every garment a divorce from nature, fine wove buttons, silk twist stays, fustian breeches, French camlet coat, gloved and swaddled against the weather, booted against mud, chafing of stirrup, leather, and horsehide, wholly naked as little as possible, shift off, shirt on, as quickly as can be. Don't let the mirror see, don't look down, separate even from themselves, hiding from the sallow underbelly, organs of generation, disdaining the flesh that keeps them from heaven. Vocalizing in pairs and groups like rooks, not in solitude like the redbreast or the titlark, no singing from wood to wood in sexual fervor, no bellowing in heat from field to field, face to face instead of along Selborne Street, nose to nose, hand to hand, arm in arm, curious soft monotone of the human tongue, nasal humming, the dried sticks and leaves of consonants, whole ricks and granaries of meaning threshed each day, lords of the creation, to all appearances set apart by reason, domicile, dress, and language, best argument of God's intent they call themselves, adducing in evidence the perfection of their size, not too pygmean to fight off a raven, not too gigantic to ride a horse, properly proportioned to manage the inferior creatures. So goes their curious, their infantile logic. So excellent a piece of workmanship, writes the physico-theologist of his own kind, such a microcosm, such an abridgment of the Creator's art in him, as is alone sufficient to demonstrate the being and attributes of God, no mention of a few unwelcome facts, lack of a hard rind, or soft pelt, cruelly exposed to frost and heat and hunger, nothing ready at hand in this world for their use, no proper food, always another tool to be fashioned, another loaf to be baked, another storehouse to be built, not putting their heads down and gazing in May, but able to argue upward from themselves to God, to discover in all that surrounds them, and especially in themselves, the manifestation of a great Creator, if only to admire what Mr. Gilbert White calls the harmony and beauty of the works of creation, and to tell sentimental stories about it. Rook murmur in the distance at the close of day. One of Curate's nieces listens for a moment. Now the rooks are saying their prayers, she exclaims, a remark Mr. Gilbert White adds, in the true spirit of physico-theology, an adorable falsehood. The genuine story, rooks looked down upon St. Mary's from the hanger on a Sunday morning. Stream of parishioners into the church. Stroke of the bells in the tower, murmur of the human voices from a distance coming across the Ewell, then silence. Now the humans are saying their prayers, a rook observes with absolute probity. Some years chafers fall upon the village after wintering as rookworms in the earth. Apple blossom and oak leaf come out in May. Hordes of rapacious beetles descend, annoy the night air with their buzzing flight, blunder into the cavities of my carapace, rattle against candlelit windows. Wherever they swarm, the country stinks of them. Chafers fall into sheep from branches and leaves. Maggots ensue the wool. Whole woods of oak are eaten bare. Hedges and gardens defaced, herb and leaf stripped. Field boys cannot drive the beetles off, undeterred by farmers and gardeners and weedy women. Dogs of no avail. Cats flee hanger, field, and garden, thick with insects, eating their fill, devouring the downs, naked, leafless state of the world. Schaeffer years, 1774, 1778, 1782, 1786, everything would be destroyed. But rooks in the thousands bring out their young and take the insects in flight. Dolls from the church tower came to Mr. Gilbert White's orchard, as if to acknowledge his curacy. Turkeys and the house sparrows worked the grass plots, fattening on the hordes, feasting on the chafer plague. Every 4th year it is good to be a rook, and when chafers fail, rooks live hard. The beetle storm passes, oaks recover llama's growth of beautiful foliage later in summer, but not the horse chestnut. Beech and maple bear for the season, a predictable scourge. In shaper years, humans do not seem so separate from the rest of creation, when without rooks and dogs they would famish, nor when rains fall and farmers plant in absolute dust. When wells dry up in the village, Mr. Gilbert White lengthens the well rope and still brings up water foul and turbid, unfit for brewing and washing. The spring at Kember's Mad fails. Ponds on the common empties. In Newton's great pond, only a few puddles remain for the villagers. Grass burnt to a powder. Upland villages in distress. Mills at Hawkey and Gratham, barely able to grind. Not enough water to turn the wheel. Barely for autumn hogs goes unmilled. Butter at 9p a pound. Butter pots go empty. Men watch the storm divide. Palpable hunger in their faces. Skirts of the southern tempest coast past Selburn without a drop. Or is it worse than the rains persist? Wells overflow, Levant through Cobb's courtyard, country all in a flood. Hay rots on the ground, rafts of it swept down river from the meadows, postboys drowned, gentlemen swimming from their chases. Fields drenched and all the spring corn still abroad. What wheat rising in price? Very little left in the kingdom. Earth glutted, 50 inches in a single 12-month. The human year, 1782, clover spoiled, fodder in short supply. No forest peat laid out for the poor. Even I nearly fled under the laurel hedge that March, till rescued by Thomas. And always the dread of winter, fear of the dark, the cold, the hunger. Day but a few hours of dim light. Scouring winds, pitiful fires, not nearly warm-blooded enough, these humans. Rover buries his nose under his tail, finds a corner out of his draught. Poultry sink their heads in their down. Humans numb the bone all winter long. Their heaven is only warm feet. A sudden frost enters the house. Fresh provisions ruined. Bread, apples, potatoes, cheese. Boys slide on lakes merely to stay warm. Better than huddling hungry in the dark. Measles and colds and whooping cough drag down the villagers already weakened. A hard winter destroys infants and the elderly, kills blackbirds and larks and the poor living on the gleanings of farmer fields. Better to be a hog carrying straw in January than a pauper. But agriculture, Mr. Gilbert White writes, is now arrived at a pitch to perfection. Famines rare, gardens improve, gardeners get fortunes, green stalls in cities support multitudes. No one need eat salted flesh who has money to buy fresh. And what about those who can buy neither? This profusion is only 2 draughts and a bad winter deep. A feverish June cold makes its way from Russia, bills of mortality swell. Up on their stilts of reason these humans catch every draught, every catarrh. Incessant labor merely to feed themselves, while I neither toil nor spin. Mr. Gilbert White calls me a poor being, lost in torpor. Poor embarrassed reptile, but what have I not survived? Winter after winter, drought and flood. No human devices or artifices, no fires or coal scuttles. No need to dig wells, or lay up provisions, or cut and cock and thatch and sainfoin in order to feed the cattle that will fill the larder once butchered and hung in the pendant meat safe. I feast in the seasonal variety of this garden, but I would die just as well in the underbrush on the hanger. So strict an economist is nature, for humans no less. Hedged in by rainfall and frost-drying winds, condemned to watch ricks swell and shrink. Prices rise and fall. Wells dry up and overflow. Sheep, lamb, and die. Nothing to do but make a larger pile of turnips, a more extensive flock, to lay by as much possible against the uncertainty of the coming months. Since we must not expect plenty, Mr. Gilbert White writes, till Providence sends us more favorable seasons, farmers stack wheat sheaves in barn mows, thresh from the outside in. After a cold, damp harvest, the cold, damp flour comes first. The best wheat lies at the bottom of the mow, the miller says, and won't come forth till spring. So they earnestly hope. Reason is the parlor fire that warms their toes. Hope is a heath fire, burning whole hillsides, making a great smoke among them. Cold-blooded is the story that humans tell of reptiles, but we thrive, humans and reptiles, on the same heat, from the same source. They draw theirs indirectly, I draw mine direct, lie under the fruit wall in the warmth of the winter sun, shell tilted to catch those feeble rays, absorb the planet's heat from deep underground, hunger set aside for half the year. A human lying under the fruit wall is at best a vagabond. Won't lie there for long. Hunger gets him up if Thomas, with a digging prong, doesn't stir him first. Culprit who robs Mr. Gilbert White's apricot tree, one of the poor who steal farmers' corn in the night after a bitter winter. A human lying in the winter sun as I do is likely a corpse. Enterprise, Mr. Gilbert White calls this human fever, warm-blooded inability to leave off eating, incessant calls for replenishment, always another round to be paid for somehow, dinner a worry before breakfast digested, whole of creation down the maw of man, merely to keep the kiln warm. A cruel slavery it is, all the while the earth reeks with heat. I rose early that day, soon after cockcrow, fully awake for the first time in months. Hunger everywhere I look, scent of Provence rose famishes me. Cucumbers bristling inside their dripping hand glasses, blossoms still clinging to succulent fruit. I graze in the grass walk till the sun begins to lift the dew, shadows still wet, skeins a spider web across the fields. I stride down the garden on the points of my claws, a bustle in my blood. Long of leg, pertinacious tail, exceptionally brisk, strikingly mobile. As animated as the pettichaps and the crown imperials, walking elate, Mr. Gilbert White calls it. When a May morning strikes me this way, my earnestness he takes as a sign of impending rain. At the first drop he supposes I shall run my head up in a corner, as if I were a lady dressed in all her best attire shuffling away on the first sprinklings. I scarcely know the timid reptile of whom he writes, I who slept in Byzantine walls, who clawed Mediterranean sands, climbed the Tarsus, crossed the seas to England. Wicket gate stands open. No one by. What is there to deter me? No surtout to pack, no mare to saddle, no instructions to Miss John White, no guineas or banknotes to tuck into my tiled waistcoat. Out I go, leaving only questions behind me. How, the wicket gate? Where, the bean field just short of the pound field? Why, above all, why? Why is two questions. How could I leave such a paradise? After everything we gave you, needs provided for, immoderate safety, kindness, even affection to of its humans, voice of the naturalist in the cool of the day, refuge from the sun under the shade of my dinner. But also, what impels me? What spurs me on? What is my motive for venturing forth? Mr. Gilbert White imagines only one. Thomas catches me up in his hands, returns me to the asparagus in the den of Daniel Wheeler's boy, Calm comes over the garden. Miss John White returns to the kitchen. Goody Hammond is her singing and Blossom sweeping. Thomas goes back to the barn. That evening, Mr. Gilbert White takes up the pen to Miss Wally White. To summarize why, Timothy, he writes, has conceived a notion of much satisfaction to be found in the range of the meadow and Baker's Hill, and that beautiful females might inhabit those vast spaces which appeared boundless in his eye. But having wandered till he was tired, and having met with nothing but weeds and coarse grass and solitude, he was glad to return to the poppies, the lettuces, and other luxuries of the garden. Indeed, the fable that humans love to tell. One bright morning the prodigal tortoise sallies forth, rich in notions, wealthy in prospect, but the world is an unrelenting place, lonely, coarse grass, weeds, imaginary females. Alas, the comforts of home, luxuries of the garden, old settled ways, rejoicing over the lost sheep, fatted calf, a mammal's tale told to the sound of a crackling fire. Never leave home unsure of your next good blaze. Mr. Gilbert White offers another version of that book of his. The motives that impel him to undertake these rambles, he notes, seem to be of an amorous kind. His fancy then becomes intent on sexual attachments which transport him beyond his usual gravity, and induce him to forget for a time his ordinary sullen deportment. The organ of fancy, where is it lodged? How does it come to be so vacant in tortoises, empty of all but the thought of sexual attachments? No human thinks more liberally of the brute creation than Mr. Gilbert White, is every day devoted to their study, glimpsing the inwardness of their lives, coherence of their conversation, domesticated or wild, in hedge, hanger, or stream, on wing, foot, fin, or belly, as well versed in the ring, ousel, and goat-sucker as he is in the farmer and maid. Larks in January, vast congregations, snow, dark and still. Mr. Gilbert White cannot account for their flocking in winter. Not a time for mating, food scarce. What draws the birds together? Perhaps larks flock together, Mr. Gilbert White suggests, out of the helplessness and rigorous seasons, as men crowd together when under great calamities, though they know not why. Common wellspring shared alike among animals and humans, only an analogy, but a tender one, also a confession of sorts. Sometimes humans do things they know not why. Severe tempest, body torn by the storm from the gibbet on Hindhead, damaged shipping in Portsmouth, rigging in tatters. Men crowd the docks to see the battered hulls. They know not why. Opera house and the Haymarket burns. Men watch the embers as if roasting potatoes among them, crowding together to share the burden of this judgment, comfort in the presence of their fellows. Even the pickpockets are somehow consoling. Cries of the ballad sellers, they know not why. Humans have their motives, as many as they care to name. Reason is a waterhouse full of motives. But only two, says the naturalist, can belong to the viper and the owl. Only love and hunger drive the swifts and martins and all the beasts of Selborne. The urge to perpetuate their kind and to preserve individuals. The action of every animal, every insect, comes down at last to its overwhelming purpose. The intercourse between the sexes, true enough perhaps, but mark the application. Judge the naturalist as narrowly as he judges the rest of creation. Merely a beast like any other, after all, tottering, stilt-gated, praying, reasoning, man of system, man of the cloth, but blood, brain, bowels, and bile nonetheless. Every day carries the curate somewhere, over the hanger toward Newton, along Coburg to Oakhanger or Priory Farm, to Alton and Farringdon and Emshot, to St. Mary's or the vicarage at the very least, by post-chaise, on horseback, on foot, alone, and in company. His motive? It cannot be hunger. Mr. Gilbert White is a lean eater. Miss John White looks after the provisions of his house. Garden crowded with vegetables early and late. Cos and Dutch lettuces stand winter long under the fruit wall, sheltered beneath straw. Bantams lay all summer, cellar full. Port wine bottled in Selborne for the hogshead. Cider, French brandy, raisin wine, strong beer brewed in the Wilts method, fine as rock water, sugar loaves on the kitchen shelf, meat pantry buzzing in the walnut tree, well provisioned like a joint of beef. Mr. John Hill over the way commands for the asking of a ready supply of mutton and veal. London wagon comes as near as Farringdon. Hams and baskets of oysters as good as Iceland codfishes, if Mr. Gilbert White merely troubles his niece to send them. Bushels of apples and pears from the garden, preserves of every kind. In January he tubs and salts up a fine young hog raised by Timothy Turner, 90 pounds of pork. If not hunger, then his motive must be love, a Morris dalliance, serving his generation as well as his captain, succoring widows, anointing wives, catechizing daughters, carrying the seed as well as the gospel, spreading a clerical honeydew over the parish. To what other motive can the naturalist attribute such roamings? Why else does the curate take him so much trouble? The very question he might ask of the linnet or stag. Folly to think so, of course. The curate has more than two strings of love and hunger to tug at, a larger, more complicated why in humans he believes than gorging and rutting. So why not in the rest of creation? How, the naturalist begins to understand after years of study. He records the when and where and which of the birds of passage, beasts of the field. Those are the very questions that system is poised to answer, but why will never be solved by system. No number of small corpses, dissected, tagged, and preserved, will ever begin to answer why. How the nightingale sings, pitch of the notes, melody of the song, structure of the voice box, but never fully the nightingale's why. Woodmen tell me, Mr. Gilbert White notes, that fern owls love to sit upon the logs of an evening, but what their motive is does not appear. Is not the love of sitting upon logs of an evening motive enough? What is the motive for taking tea at the Hermitage on a blue afternoon, grey and still? To understand the motives of the rest of creation, Mr. Gilbert White will have to consult his own. But humans are blinded, even the naturalist, by being human, barely able to witness what is not human, always conjuring with the separateness of their species, separate creation, special dominion, embarrassed by signs of their animal nature, veritable teats, undeniable pizzle. Thank God for reason. Distant relations at best, the birds and beasts of the parish, cut out of the will, scratched out of the family Bible. Mr. Gilbert White rides over the common from Newton. Late May in the human year, 1784, reigns his Galloway mare, and the crest of the hanger, every manner of living in sight or in memory on this sweet warm evening, bees thriving, flycatcher nestling under the parlor window, kestrel hovering over the hayfield below, ravens tumbling in flight, swifts nearly lost in the clouds, rooks at their endless beech-top quarrels, swallows taking food up and down the river, feeding their young in exact rotation, mare beneath him feeling the pool of home, tortoise making her escape into the fields among the grass. Brute beasts that have no understanding, says the prayer book, driven only by love and hunger, driven they know not why, but I know why. 44 years among humans by the time I escaped through the wicket gate, 9 years more down this present day. I am not natured for it, not fitted for their proximity. Fine beings, in a way, well adapted to their own presence, inventive to a fault, resourceful. What is there in this world, asks the physico-theologist, that man's contrivance doth not extend unto, and make some way or other advantageous to himself, but they belong in the far distance, rare glimpses, drab thin figures, moving against the backdrop of the sea, across a clearing near the ancient Odeon, set upon their own poor passage through the country, stopping to sleep, fill a goat's bladder at a freshwater spring, tend a cook fire in the shade of a cistern, no time to take interest in a tortoise musing on a rebel wall, minding their business, moving on, taking their contrivance with them, and I am as captive now as the day when I was shoved in a bag and stowed in a ship's belly. Mr. Gilbert White thinks only to ask what I'm escaping toward, not what I'm escaping from. But then he is the gardener. His is the garden. Runnel of his life was washed down the same course all these years. He lives in the place of his birth. To imagine escape, he must imagine enticement. Not quite the old interrogatory in that look of his, the one from Ringmer days in early Selborne. Then I was a mere quantum of tortoise to him, experimental substance to be tried against certain hypotheses. But Mr. Gilbert White ages. Even less of the little flesh on his cheeks. A something of Miss Rebecca Snook in the lines of his face. Nervous cough, gout reddens his left hand. Shooting and burning, now it wanders to other extremities, his gravel comes and goes, feverish disorder with it. And yet he sells kidney beans. In the ground, iron hard after a long dry spring. cuts cucumbers as they ripen, and offers me the parings, waters the poplar at the foot of the bostel, measures the largest beech in Sparrow's Hanger, object of special veneration, with his brother, Mr. Benjamin White, keeps the weather daily as he's done these 40 years. He has cherished the parish, married the parish, buried the parish, served this village nearly all his days, forsaken other chances for it, other lives. His look at last suggests that we are both caught up in the same hypothesis, the same experiment. For natural historian, it is a great step forward. Mr. Gilbert White's kindness toward me is not abated, walled only by the fact of my captivity, his inability to restore me to my birthright, to a place he knows nothing of. I am not some fledgling swift to be stuck with flies and tossed back up onto the church shingles. Among the humans, some are gamekeepers, some shepherds. Some are good at coppice work, others prefer the long furrow in the company of a plough horse. Some are mowers whose sides set the pace. The monster differs in outlook and habits from the miller. Butcher and blacksmith are as different as whole lives and their livelihoods can make them. They know little of the shopkeeper's turn of mind, or the surveyor's. Brick burner understands the mason's job, but cannot lay a plumb wall himself. Sawyer cannot fill in professionally for saddle-maker or hedge-layer. Nor can any of these men mend a shirt, or embroider a bride's linen, or keep a house as trim as sheep of the line, the way the women of Selborne can. Not a human in the parish who can do for himself everything needed to live, unless he lives as meagerly and cannily as a fox. To each man or woman a vocation of one kind or another, no matter how humble, all fitted together in the economy of Selborne. Even the curate, reading aloud on Sundays, directing the bowing of heads and closing of eyes, parting living and dead, joining man and woman, sprinkling infants, visiting the sick, cheering the downhearted, overseeing the small charities vested in him, a matter of £10 annually to teach poor parish children how to write, sew, knit, and say their prayers. To bind them out as apprentices and servants, merely to be human, is not nearly enough. But what is the heron's vocation? To what occupation is the viper called? Or summer's myriad of frogs? What trade was the otter following when he strayed down the rivulet? Only a single vocation, and the rest of this earthly parish, all the rest of creation, vocation of place. For an owl feeds aloft with cunning claw, osprey it plunges to gather its food, thrush eats shell snails, bullfinch honeysuckle bats, martin coleoptera. No matter how they get their living where they must. Ages of ancestors fit them for marsh and hedge or underwood beach. Expert in their terrain, minutely particular in habitation, fitted just so into the mosaic of Selborne. Some to dwell here all their lives, some like the ring ousel merely to use the parish hills as an inn or baiting place. One occupant only to live forever displaced. Stone curlew never strides through the garden poppies, never makes her evening flight at noon. Nowhere but where she is fitted to, among the gray-spotted flints that match her feathering. Clambering in upland fields and sheep walks. Who she is, a matter of where she is, the patter she shakes in migrating, long legs strutting out behind her, the place she comes to rest. Rook in the beech tops, trout in the stream, owl in the high wood, cricket in the damp, wild pigeons reaching in strings for a mile together as they went out in a morning to feed, before Magdalen College cut in its wood on the hanger. Place is what they practice, and all sufficient knowledge. Some live narrowly, insects moored in the country of the single oak crown, like the milkmaid who has never left her quarter of the parish. Others live in a place more extensively than Mr. Gilbert White can imagine, as widely as Mr. Charles Eddy, who voyages nearly round the world, surviving shipwreck, standing and groaning the leaking of crazed vessels. Stationary voyagers, some of them. Barnacles encrusting the hull, shipworm infesting it, as fixed in place, beating across mid-ocean as the turn overhead, and our age-old route under the stars. All summer long the short-winged, soft-billed birds flit from hedge to hedge, ambit of only a few dozen yards. Yet when that other live place pools in autumn, they go to unimaginable trouble, unimaginable to the naturalist. Such feeble bad flyers, Mr. Gilbert White exclaims, should be able to traverse vast seas and continents in order to enjoy milder seasons amidst the regions of Africa, as inexplicable to him as the longevity of a tortoise. I am at a loss even what to suspect about them, he writes, but those birds are students of their prophet, and as surely as the governors of the East India Company, routes more fixed, more certain, than the company's ships. Sense a place firmly bound to their sense of time, wheeling about the year across the globe, following their vocation. Mr. Gilbert White mocks his own fixedness, rooted in Selborne, calls himself a venerable vegetable, remaining like a cabbage on the same spot for months together. But if a cabbage were human, it would aspire to become a lettuce, pull up roots and go up to town to see what's doing in the artichoke way. Such a restless tribe, such a turbulent animal, as Mr. Gilbert White says of the hog. No proper wear to these humans. Any wear will do. The only indispensable wear for them is among other humans. Smell of cottage smoke through the trees, October mists over the rich corn valves, dividing a lottery ticket among themselves, the little farmers, servants, and laborers. Dances and balls on moonshiny nights, close press of village life's monotonous, but all the kinship I feel in this life for my native scrub, as fitted to that place as the eye to the use of seeing, Mediterranean shore and rocky spine, rising from the water, sound and sit of those waves against the headland, taste of the salt in the brush itself, all the kinship I have ever needed is no less real for all that than Mr. Gilbert White, who counts up his scores and nephews and nieces as they are added to the fold. Who knows better than the most claims of the place? I do well enough here till winter comes. An inaccurate observer would conclude that my breed might prosper in England, and yet this is merely the facsimile of a life. I am native now only to this garden, to Mr. Gilbert White's presence, contemplating the welcome ache of this existence. I had other expectations once. They come upon me sometimes as I dig my herbaculum in the rest of autumn, mere phantoms now until I drift away under the snow, find the current again. I do not fret my summer days at the edge of the ha-ha. Worry how to get over the fruit wall, or around the precipice of Mr. Gilbert White's house. I never hope to be carried out of the cabbage by some willing accomplice into the Ewell, or over the sheep down. No illusions about what lies beyond this place. Brick walk through the wicket gate does not lead through rough Sicilia. No retracing the path of chance. But my motive for leaving is plain enough, neither hunger nor love. I wish to be out of human reach, out from under the constant stir, laborious turmoil of this breed. Endless bother of humans, toil inherent in their mere existence, dizzying inability to bask or amuse, the painstaking paradise of this garden, adjoining fields, plotting and measuring and planning, cutting vistas, raising obelisks in oil jars, touching up poor Hercules, trimming hedges, amending this bit of earth and that bit of mining chalk to spread on the fields, digging basins to fill with black malm, burying rank, stiff, wheat-bearing clay under loads of ashes and manure, under marl, lime rubbish, peat dust, soot from the malt house, old rotting thatch, woolen rags to be dug into the hop garden, half a barrel of American gypsum on the fourth ridge of Timothy Turner's wheat, whole sapling forests in transit, cargoes of shrubs, hither and yon, London to Selborne and back again, perpetual traffic in slips and seeds and cutting and roots, nursery garden, late shields, fern and thatcher, seedsmen and net makers in the Raven Fleet Street, Mr. William Curtis, Mr. Philip Miller, a start from the vicarage, annuals, bulbs, and endive from Daniel Wheeler, bulbous roots lifted and hung in paper bag in lumber garret, hotbeds in late winter, cartloads of steaming manure, circoraceous heaps, cucumber frames and hand glasses, and stowing them away again, memorandum of their whereabouts, the pegs that hold the frames together, planting asparagus and grubbing it up, picking caterpillars off the Savoys, play of the water engine over the vegetable rows and draughty weeks, weeding and hoeing, tacking and pruning, raking and mowing, sweeping and edging, coming and going, annual recurrence of Goody Hammond, regular as a swift, bleeding with pity as always, fastidiousness, preparation, harvest. On the street of the clanker of the blacksmith's hammer, above the cluster of the bells of St. Mary's, bellowing of herded kine in the fields at weaning, cry of the hop poles in the spring wind, uproar of the cattle fair and honey market, combs from upland bee gardens sold from a cart, cranberries, whortleberries, herring, and mackerel halt at the door, shouts of men and boys from the cricketing place cut by the curate nearly 40 years ago, sudden crowd in the street, tumult of spectacle and entertainment, donkey races, toad-eating quack, country people staring in wonder, porker to be shot in the Christmas season, war pigs to be bowled for, farm ring to be played at for good watch of 1 guinea value. There is the headache that gratifies humans so, contagion of their company, stew they frolic in, I've no part in it, want none. Not just the fracas, the roiling of their presence, only a human could love the order of this garden, laid out as carefully as the prayer book, profound affection for geometry, furs in the quick cooks, Vegetable indices in sharp, neat rows, planted just so, just thus, just short of alphabetical, the eye herded down views, decoyed into landscapes, gaps in the hedges promptly filled, carrots and cabbages picked to serve the symmetry of their beds. Each blade of grass on the grass plot cut to just the same height. Plants that played truant, encouraged to do so to heighten their sense of order. Mr. Gilbert White knows the particulars of every specimen visible from the kitchen door. From the gentle summit of Baker's Hill, he writes of trees in the outlet having overstood their time, maples, hazels, white thorn laid out in walks by his father, but he is also thinking of himself. He his own time nearly overstood. Landscape of names and origins, associations reaching back to his grandfather's days and beyond, memory of man impossibly short. But I wish to live in the ancient disorder of nature again, where everything grows according to his kind, as it will or won't, without the work of human hands, arising from the natural ground, as Mr. Gilbert White calls it, infinitely subtle order, lying outside this garden, nearly out of the reach of human memory, beyond mud and hanger and sheepwalk, beyond Yule close and litten close, if only in some overlooked interstice of the parish. No telling how far away true wilderness lies, perhaps none to be found short of crossing those seas again. All nature is so full, Mr. Gilbert White writes, that district produces the greatest variety which is the most examined. True enough, but that greatest variety exists even if not examined, begins to diminish when examiners settle down in the district, raise their walls, bound their fields, improve their husbandry, set the way-meanders to working the roads. The old wonder I felt crossing into the order of that ancient city out of the scrub and onto those mosaic floors, nakedness I felt for once, my presence echoing off those broken walls, like walking on the wave surface of the sea, graces beneath my feet, Hermes, Nike, feeling that I was being watched from below, from above, from every angle, from past and future, feeling that I was falling. To break the spell, I simply stepped back into the scrub, out of human and into the clover, onto the scree, suddenly myself again, to live in the streets the humans had abandoned. To abandon them myself whenever I liked, harsh outlines, painful geometries of the city softened by decay. World lines of brush capping the walls as if to hide the city from discovery by sea. Walls sinking into the scrub, as if the thatch of Selburne had taken root and sent up seed head. Whole village bedaubed by martins and swallows in their building until Selburne is more hirundine than human, not a straight line left. I wish to live again in a place that is not a map of the gardener's mind. Book of Nature, as humans love to think of it. But where I wish to live is not a book at all, not an argument for the being and attributes of an unnecessary God, not a theorem, hypothesis, or demonstration, merely itself. Of the eggs laid alongside mine in the nest, how many ever hatched? And of those hatchlings, how many still live? How did it come about that I have survived all these years, and survived this long? This strange dislocation, out of such questions the gods are made, but it is only a matter of chance, long odds, doze elsewhere on that one day, 53 years ago, and the sea might still roll to a stop at my feet, hatched in the rubble of my ancient country, lodged, abandoned, in the oat-green glory of this all-too-human place, this alien abundance, how one life led to another, there is no explaining, no why to be reasoned out. Mediterranean skies over Selborne now and then, glow of a southern sea, but the Hampshire sky staggers me now with loveliness, creeping fogs in the pastures, gossamers on the stubbles. The parish rings with light, whole being of the world distilled into a moment, when everything I know and remember seems to surround me at once, embodied in this tangible earth. I think those who have not lived to see what I have seen wonder that only I, in all of my race, should be present here to notice weltering flocks on wing overhead, aurora dimming the northern stars, but the first condition of beauty is survival. Mr. Gilbert White outlasts his younger brothers, Mr. John White and Mr. Henry White. 4 other siblings lost in infancy or youth, parents long dead. Miss Rebecca Snook, poor dear niece, Miss Brown, dies in childbirth. One by one the neighbors fall away. Mr. Richard Yalden, Reverend Andrew Eddy, Berbies and Lassams, Beechers and Berrymans, Dame Turner, widow, orphan, and her old age, Warwick, infant son of Mr. and Miss George Smith. The curate chronicles them out of existence as they go, signs the register, leads the prayer, lets the spade resume its work, hopes to survive himself in some supernal city, the hope of all his little flock. As vain as unnecessary as the wishes of a garden tortoise, half a lifetime away from her natural home. Today, cold dew, lowering clouds, warning, softening, iron going out of the ground at last. Sun less reluctant, summer promising and overdue. Men wash their sheep, one by one, ready the fleece for shearing. Ewes and wethers flow past dogs and men in the fields. Flat nasal peals shoal over the parish. Whistles have been the very voice of mid-June. Mr. Gilbert White in his bed shirt, at the window above the kitchen, there for only a moment a few days past, face washed by illness, dimmed by bright clouds mirroring across the glass, last in his garden several days ago, walking among the dame's violets, the 10 weeks' stalks, cutting 4 cucumbers. How much of his life has he devoted to that fruit? His plans are laid, to lie in his bed a little while longer, to be borne from St. Mary's by 6 day-laboring men with families to raise, 10 shillings each for a short morning service, to be placed in a grave in the natural ground, with the shade of the church walls, simple stone, G.W., and the numeral of the day in June in the given year, 1793, as plain as his initials set into the fruit wall above me. By hot-picking time, grass will stir on his grave, thick in the wind, as if he had always lain there, intended like his father, with as little show and expense as may be, and without any monument, not desiring to have my name recorded save in the book of life. For now there is all the doctoring to be got through, back and forth of William Webb, surgeon of Alton, journey in the morning, journey in the evening, duly receipted, 8 days end on end. With him come his wares, his potions, his useless knowledge, alkaline mixtures, acid mixtures, lavender, water, and laudanum, draughts, emulsions, ointments, boluses, fomentations, astringents, anodynes, gum arabic, burnt hartshorn, spirit of nitre, enough to kill a strapping young yeoman, patient forced to comfort the doctor more than once, to deny his pain and acknowledge his hopes, if not for this world. Result bill for £9, 8 shillings, 2pence. Fee to Dr. Littlehaler included. Horses a post boy express that final morning. To Salisbury from Mr. John White, the former Gibraltar Jack, his bride of this year, late Miss Louisa Neve, making the last of the curate's nephews and nieces, numbering 62. The naturalist and Mr. Gilbert White will watch as closely as the cleric and him for the approach of that interesting moment. Quiet dissolution of self. Mr. John White at his bedside, warm, strong hands on his, and Thomas, man-servant, gardener to him these 40 years, standing beside the window, looking now at the garden and the great meadow, the hangar beyond it, now at the form in the bed, outside the whetting of a mower's scythe on an early dewy morning, sound his master rejoiced in their presence the answer to one of Mr. Gilbert White's lifelong questions comes upon him. Merely human at last, one earthly parish only. Most years the bees have swarmed by now, dark tempest outside the bee-stall rising in uproar before settling in the balm of Gilead, long beard of bees dangling from a bough. The generations come and go quickly this time of year, one after another, bright new sisters clambering over the cells, spilling from the hive and into the sky if sucked from the opening, droning over the entire garden, over the great mead and into the uplands, profuse over the blossoms of the parish. This year the swarms come late, hirundines slow in building and breeding, deterred by a summer so cold and dry, wells sinking, Kingsley Mill falling, No grass among the farmers in the sands. Ground sadly burnt up. No season like it since 1765. Hollow wind, Mr. Gilbert White wrote all those years ago. Man of 45 at the time. I do not remember my garden to be so totally overcome with heat and dryness so soon in the year. 10 weeks' drought, till broken by a noble rain in early July. Even now the weather of this present June improves. Yet improves unrecorded. Weather glass reverse unattended. Thermometer rises unacknowledged. Rain gauge spills over with the water of several showers. No one brings the balance forward. Thomas feels the blush of a fog over the garden as he walks toward the brew-house through the morning darkness. Miss John White welcomes the ripening sun even as she prepares to begin another life. The villagers notice what they have always noticed. They speak the words to each other: sun, shower, sweet, even, gleams. But no one troubles to write them down. System set aside in this place. Present vanishes outright without leaving a trace. Wind on the 15th of June, 1793, from the northeast veering to the southwest. Matter of record. Wind on the 16th, no one will ever know who did not live through it. And I will go unweighed this autumn. Experiment over. Novelty of that ceremony long since worn off in the village. Old customer by now in Jack Burby's shop. Miss Elizabeth Burby, his wife, does the weighing. Cool hands. Her husband gauges too. At rising this year I weigh 6 pounds 5½ ounces. No particular notice of my 6 ounces lost in April last. Even the naturalist makes no mention of it. Merely a fact of the world of facts. I notice. I am slowly eroding. This England is washing me away, unobserved and uninscribed like the weather. One more winter in me, whether it is mild or savage, into my herbernaculum for good, well embarked by the time the humans discover where I lie, when the snows melt, when the nightingale sings, when the swifts dash and play around the church again, but till I dig the last nest, and snow settles over the garden, a time remains to me, stub of days still longer than the lives of many creatures in this parish, substantial to me even after so many years. See the human season out once more, same point of the rick, turnips hoeing, chalk hauling, fallows stirring against the coming year, hops in the kiln, barley malting, pigs in the beech mast, and acorns, the drawing and stacking of turnips, parlor fire lit, fine autumnal tinges, leaves falling fast, maple hedges aglow in the last sun of the afternoon, russets and deerlings hang fast in the trees, swan's egg and chaltmontel and virgulus pears. Twilight seems to ripen them. Brush lights begin to flicker around the village. As pale as the first stars overhead, I dig and dig, settle the dirt on my shell, as deep as I can go into the warmth of earth, carefully overlaid with autumn's debris, anchored, immured, landlocked, becalmed and buoyed into the doldrums of Selborne. Historical note. This is a true story. Timothy's shell is preserved in the Natural History Museum in London. Scientists in the 19th century determined from the shape of the shell that Timothy was indeed female. A modern scientist has confirmed the fact and demonstrated that Timothy came from a subspecies of tortoise whose native home is central Mediterranean coast of Turkey. The topography around Gilbert White's house and village of Selborne itself has changed very little over the years. Gilbert White kept a spare but detailed natural history journal for most of his adult life. He has also saved many of his household receipts, which are in the Houghton Library of Harvard University. His letters were collected more than a century ago, and a new edition is long overdue. One or two of his sermons have been published. Manuscripts or others are also at Harvard, and of course there is White's great work, The Natural History and Antiquities of Selborne, which was published in early 1789 and has now gone out of print for the first time in more than 200 years. Using these works and much research besides, I've tried to make this portrait of Selborne and the life around it as accurate as possible. Timothy's language and opinions are her own, except where she borrows silently from the quiet poetry of Gilbert White's journals. And then there's a glossary. And that's it. Thank you for listening to Timothy or Notes of an Abject Reptile by Verlyn Klinkenborg. I love this book so much. I've read it several times. I'm not sure which part is actually my favorite. I just love all of the observations about everything. It's a hilarious book in many ways, but also very sad in other ways. Let me know what your favorite parts were, and thank you for listening.